He spent the night wrapped in another woman's arms, while his wife was alone at home, feeding their 3-month-old son at 2 a.m., crying into the dark because she finally understood she was completely invisible to the man she had married. That morning, Caleb Mercer came home to a silent house. No crying baby, no smell of coffee, no Elena moving through the kitchen with Noah on her hip, the way she always did. Just silence, and on the kitchen counter her wedding ring. Cold, small, sitting there like a period at the end of a sentence she had been writing for months. He stood in that kitchen for a full minute before he understood what he was looking at. Before the silence stopped being peaceful and started being the loudest thing he'd ever heard. His wife was gone. His son was gone. And somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the panic, beneath the fury, a voice he'd been ignoring for 6 months whispered, "You knew this was coming. If this story already has you gripped, if you've ever wondered what it would take for a man to truly lose everything he thought he owned, then stay with us." Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what happens next, because this story is only getting started. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand where Caleb Mercer ends up, you have to understand exactly who he was before everything collapsed. Caleb Mercer had always been the kind of man who moved through a room and made other men straighten up. Not because he was cruel, not because he raised his voice or made threats or put his fist through walls. He didn't have to do any of that. He had something colder and more effective, the absolute certainty that he was right, that he was capable, and that the world around him would eventually arrange itself to confirm both. He was 34 years old. He ran a mid-sized logistics company out of Seattle that he had built from a 2-person operation into a firm with 11 employees and contracts with 3 regional distribution chains. He drove a truck that cost more than most people's first homes. He owned a 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood where the lawns were always cut and nobody left trash bins at the curb past Tuesday. He was the kind of man others point at it when they needed an example. And he had spent his entire adult life believing that was enough. Elena was 31. She had a degree in graphic design she'd stopped using 18 months ago when the pregnancy got difficult and the freelance clients started feeling like too much. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept the house running so quietly that Caleb never had to think about it, who made dinner at 6:30 and kept it warm until 8 when he finally came home and ate it in front of his laptop without asking how her day had been. She had loved him deeply once. She had tried to love him long after she probably should have stopped. They had met at a mutual friend's barbecue 7 years ago, when Caleb was still building something and Elena was still the woman who believed in the man she saw underneath the ambition. She had laughed at his jokes, challenged his opinions, looked him in the eye when she talked to him like he was actually worth the full attention. He had told his best friend Marcus that same night, "That's the one." Marcus had said, "Then don't screw it up." Caleb had screwed it up. Slowly, methodically, and with the complete unconscious commitment of a man who never believed anything important could actually slip away from him. The affair with Tessa Vale had started 6 months before the morning he came home to find the ring on the counter. It hadn't started with intention. He would have told you that and halfway believed it. Tessa was a sales rep for one of his distribution partners, attractive and sharp and completely unburdened by a 3-month-old infant and the kind of marital tension that had turned his home into a place he didn't want to come back to. She laughed at his jokes the way Elena used to. She looked at him like he was still interesting. That was the whole thing, really. That was the entire foundation of what Caleb told himself was something real. The first time was at a hotel near the airport after a client dinner that had run late. He had told himself it wouldn't happen again. Then it happened 7 more times in 6 months, always at the same upscale hotel on Madison, always when he had a plausible reason to be somewhere else. He had told Elena he was traveling for work. Elena had nodded and gone back to feeding Noah. She had stopped asking him questions 3 months into the pregnancy, somewhere around the time she realized his answers were always technically correct and completely empty. The night before she disappeared, Caleb had been at the hotel with Tessa. He had drunk more than he should have. He had said things he hadn't fully meant, and also things he had meant more than he wanted to admit. He had told Tessa that his marriage was suffocating him, that Elena was obsessed with the baby and had stopped seeing him as a person, that he didn't know what he was doing anymore. Tessa had listened. She had been sympathetic. She had refilled his glass and told him he deserved better. He had believed it the way a man believes something when he's drunk and lonely, and has already spent 6 months building the story inside his head. He woke up at the hotel at 6:14 a.m. Tessa was asleep. He dressed in the pale light from the gap in the curtains, feeling the particular flatness that followed those nights, not guilt exactly, more like the absence of something he couldn't name. He drove home with the radio off, rehearsing nothing in particular because he never needed to rehearse anymore. Elena didn't ask questions. Elena was just there, except that morning she wasn't. He stood in the kitchen for a minute, maybe 2. Then he walked to the nursery. The crib was empty. Not just Noah is sleeping somewhere else empty. The mattress was bare. The mobile above the crib, the one with the little wooden birds, Elena had assembled herself, reading the instructions 3 times, because Caleb had been traveling, and she didn't want to ask Marcus to come over again, was gone. The dresser drawers hung open, empty. The closet where Elena kept the diaper bag, the extra wipes, the 4 different baby monitors they'd gone through before finding one that worked, all of it gone. He opened the drawer where they kept important documents. Birth certificates, insurance, their joint account cards. The account cards were there. The insurance was there. The passbook for their shared savings account was gone. He opened his banking app. The joint savings account, $194,600, showed a zero balance. Transferred out 4 days ago in 2 separate transactions, both of which he'd received notifications about and dismissed without reading because he was in a meeting and then forgot. He put the phone down on the counter. He picked it up again. He called Elena. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording, calm and professional. "You've reached Elena Mercer. Please leave a message." He didn't leave one. He called again. Voicemail. He called a 3rd time, then stopped himself. Stood in the kitchen with his hands flat on the counter, breathing through his nose, trying to locate the kind of steady authority that usually came naturally to him. It did not come naturally right now. He called 911 at 2 a.m., and reported his wife and infant son missing. The responding officers were polite and careful. They asked him when he had last seen his wife and child. He told them the previous morning before his business trip. They asked him where he had traveled. He said Portland. They asked for a hotel name. He gave one. Not the right one. Not even a hotel in Portland. He gave the name of a Marriott he vaguely remembered staying at in Portland 2 years ago because it was the first name that surfaced, and he hadn't yet caught up to the fact that this would matter. The officers took notes. They told him they'd be in touch. They took down Elena's description and Noah's description, 3 months old, 8 pounds when last weighed 2 weeks ago, dark hair, eyes still settling into their color. One of the officers, a woman named Rivera, paused at the nursery door and looked at the empty crib for a moment without saying anything. Caleb noticed the pause. He didn't like it. "My son is 3 months old," he said. "This is a missing child. We understand that, Mr. Mercer." Rivera said, "We'll be in touch within the hour." They were in touch within 40 minutes, but it wasn't Rivera who called back. It was Detective Mason Holloway. Holloway arrived at the house at 8:30. He was somewhere in his early 50s, wearing a gray sports coat that had been pressed at some point in the recent past. He had the particular manner of a man who had spent 20 years listening to people explain things they didn't want to explain. He accepted coffee he didn't drink. He sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and listened to Caleb's account of the previous 18 hours with an expression of professional neutrality that Caleb couldn't quite read. When Caleb finished, Holloway looked at the wedding ring on the counter. He hadn't touched it. "Your wife left that deliberately," he said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what my wife did," Caleb said. "I know my son isn't here. When did you last speak to your wife?" "Yesterday morning, before I left. And you were in Portland." A half-second pause. Yes, Holloway wrote something. "Which hotel?" Caleb gave him the Marriott name again. Holloway wrote it down and didn't look up. "How long have you been married?" 4 years. "Any recent conflicts? Arguments, separations, discussions about divorce?" "No, nothing like that." Holloway finally looked up. He had the kind of eyes that had stopped being surprised by people a long time ago. "Mr. Mercer, I want to be straightforward with you. The pattern here, the ring, the empty nursery, the cleared savings account, this doesn't read like an abduction. This reads like a planned departure." The words landed in Caleb's chest like something cold. "She took my son," Caleb said. She took her son, Holloway said carefully. We'll determine the custody and legal questions as we proceed. What I need from you right now is honest answers. Caleb looked at him across the kitchen table. He gave Holloway honest answers for exactly as long as it took Holloway to ask him the same question about Portland in 3 different ways. Then Holloway put down his pen. Mr. Mercer, the Marriott in Portland has no record of your reservation last night under your name or your credit card. The kitchen went very quiet. I think Holloway said in the same measured tone he'd used for everything else, that you should take a moment and make sure you're telling me things that are going to hold up. It took Caleb 45 minutes to stop denying it. Not because Holloway pressured him, the detective barely raised his voice, but because Caleb's entire strategy had been built on the assumption that nobody was looking closely, that his absence was unremarkable, that Elena had done something impulsive and would surface somewhere embarrassed and scared, and he would go collect her and his son, and they would have a very serious conversation about what she had done. That strategy required him to be the wronged party. Holloway's quiet, unhurried questions were dismantling it piece by piece. By 10 a.m., Caleb had confirmed that he had spent the previous night at the Madison Street Hotel with a woman named Tessa Vale. He confirmed it was not the first time. He gave Holloway 6 months of careful non-answers that eventually added up to the truth. Holloway's listened to all of it, wrote it down, thanked him for being forthcoming. Then he said, Mr. Mercer, your wife didn't disappear last night. She's been planning this for a while. The financial transfers started 4 days ago. The divorce petition was filed in Montana 3 weeks ago. I'm going to need you to understand something. The police investigation here is going to be very limited because nothing we've found so far suggests your wife is in danger. Your son is with his mother and appears to have been taken to a safe location. The legal process, not a missing persons case, is how this gets resolved. Caleb stared at him. She took $200,000 from a joint account, without my permission. That's a matter for the divorce proceedings. Holloway stood, picked up his coffee, finally took a sip, grimaced slightly. Get an attorney, Mr. Mercer, a good one. He left Caleb alone in the kitchen with the wedding ring on the counter and a silence that pressed in from every direction. He called his attorney, a man named Brandt, before noon. Brandt listened to the full account in the way expensive lawyers listen, with careful, unjudging attention that costs $400 an hour. When Caleb finished, Brandt was quiet for a long moment. The affair is going to complicate things, Brandt said. I didn't come to you about the affair. I came to you about my son. They're the same conversation now, Brandt said. Everything is the same conversation now. He paused. Do you have any idea where she is? No. Family? Close friends? Anywhere she might go? Caleb thought about it. Elena's parents were dead, her mother 4 years ago, her father when she was 19. She had a sister in Phoenix who they'd visited twice, and both times it had been uncomfortable in the particular way. Family visits are when one person has married someone the rest of the family quietly dislikes. He thought harder. There was a friend, he said slowly, from college, a woman named Mara. I don't know her last name. Elena mentioned her a few times. They reconnected about a year ago. Do you know anything about this Mara? Not much. I know Elena called her late at night a few times. I thought he stopped. You thought what? I thought it was probably just a friend thing. He stopped again, because he was only now understanding that he had noticed those late-night calls and filed them under not my concern and moved on to something that mattered more to him at the time. Brandt said he'd make some inquiries. He told Caleb not to contact Elena directly. He told him not to post anything on social media. He told him to document everything he could remember about their joint finances going back at least 2 years. Caleb wrote all of it down like a man following instructions, because the instructions were the only solid thing left in the room. He hired Silas Vey 3 days later. Marcus had given him the names Marcus, who had been his best friend since college, and who had listened to Caleb's account of the past 4 days with the careful stillness of a man who had things to say and was choosing not to say them yet. Silas is good, Marcus said. Former sheriff's investigator. He finds people. I need to find my son, Caleb said. You need to find your wife so you can get access to your son. Marcus looked at him. Caleb. Man. Are you hearing yourself? What? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Nothing. Call Silas. Silas Vey was a compact, unhurried man in his early 60s who ran his investigative practice out of a downtown office that smelled like old coffee and printer ink. He had a face that was good at giving nothing away. He listened to Caleb's account of Elena's disappearance the same way. Holloway had carefully, without visible reaction, and then asked 3 specific questions. Did Elena have access to any vehicle not registered in Caleb's name? Did she have any income or accounts Caleb didn't know about? Who was Mara? Caleb could answer the first 2. For the third, he could only tell Silas what he'd told Brant, old college friend, reconnected recently, called late at night. Last name? Silas asked. Quinn, I think. Elena? Mentioned it once. Silas wrote it down. I'll see what I can find. What Silas found over the following week was enough to make Caleb sit down in Silas's office and not stand up again for a long time. Mara Quinn was 33. She had a degree in social work she'd used for 6 years before a second career she'd built in private security consulting, specifically helping domestic violence survivors relocate and disappear safely from situations their partners didn't want them to leave. She had a record: 1 arrest for contempt of court related to refusing to disclose a client's location during a custody dispute. The charges were dropped. She had done this before, many times, and she had been in contact with Elena Mercer for 11 months. Silas laid the phone records on his desk. He laid the financial trail beside them. He laid down a copy of the private investigator's report, not his own report, but the one Elena had commissioned 9 months ago, which had documented Caleb's hotel visits with enough detail and enough photographs to make Caleb's hands go cold when he saw it. She knew, Caleb said. She's known for 9 months, Silas said. Not unkindly, just with the flat weight of a fact. Caleb looked at the photographs, him and Tessa coming out of the elevator at the Madison Street Hotel. His hand on the small of Tessa's back, him laughing, him looking entirely at ease. He looked like a man who had no idea his life was being photographed. He looked like a man who had no idea at all. She planned all of this, he said.
Yes.
For 9 months. Likely longer. The planning accelerated 9 months ago. Caleb put the photograph down. He thought about Elena at the kitchen table those 9 months, feeding Noah in the middle of the night while he was somewhere else, knowing what she knew, assembling the pieces of her exit with the quiet precision of a woman who understood she would only get one chance to do it right. He thought about what that must have taken. He didn't say that out loud. He wasn't ready to. Can you find her? He asked. I can try, Silas said. But I want you to understand something first. Mara Quinn is good at this. If Elena doesn't want to be found, it's going to take time. I have time. Silas looked at him carefully. Mr. Mercer, what's your plan when I find her? Caleb met his eyes. I want to see my son. Silas held the look for a moment. That's a reasonable thing to want, he said. How you go about it is going to matter a great deal. The call came on a Thursday evening, 17 days after Caleb came home to the empty house. He was sitting in his kitchen eating takeout that he hadn't tasted. The house had taken on the particular quality of silence that belongs to spaces where people used to be. He had been sleeping in the guest room because the master bedroom felt wrong in a way he couldn't fully explain. His phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. He answered it on the second ring, Caleb. Elena's voice. He hadn't heard it in 17 days, and it hit him somewhere behind the sternum. A complicated impact he didn't have clean words for. He sat up straight. Elena, where are you? Where's Noah? Is he okay? Noah is fine. Her voice was steady, calm in the way that things are calm after a storm has already passed. He's healthy. He's being cared for. Elena, come home. Whatever is happening between us, I'm not calling to negotiate. She said it without raising her voice. I'm calling because I want you to hear this from me directly instead of through attorneys. I'm listening. A pause. Not hesitation, the pause of someone who had decided exactly what to say and was giving themselves a moment before saying it. I know about the hotel. I know about Tessa. I know about all of it, Caleb, including the things you said to her about me. About our marriage. About wishing I would just... She stopped. Took a breath. I've known for 9 months. I know you've been wondering how I could have left without fighting you. The truth is I tried fighting you for 3 years before that. You just never noticed, because it didn't inconvenience you. He didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that, and somewhere underneath the anger, he knew it. Noah is my son too, he finally said. You can't just take him. I didn't take him. I protected him. Her voice stayed level. I'm not asking your permission, Caleb. I'm telling you what's happening. My attorneys have filed for full custody. There's a protective order. If you try to find us outside of the legal process, you will lose whatever chance you have left. What chance? The word came out sharper than he intended. The chance to actually be his father, Elena said, instead of just someone who made him. The line went quiet. Then she said, "Don't call this number back. Contact my attorney." And the call ended. Caleb sat in the kitchen with his phone in his hand for a long time. Outside, the neighborhood was going dark, the way it always did this time of evening. The same lawns, the same houses, the same ordinary Tuesday night it always was. The house was completely quiet. He thought about Elena in the middle of the night with Noah, alone, knowing what she knew, still making dinner and keeping it warm. He thought about what she had said, the chance to actually be his father, instead of just someone who made him. He set his phone down on the counter. The next morning, he called Silas and told him to keep looking. He told himself it was about Noah. He told himself that every day for the next 2 weeks. He was very good at telling himself things. Brant called him on a Friday with news that made the takeout in front of him go completely cold. The recording had surfaced. Tessa Vale, apparently anticipating some kind of legal complication, had preserved a voice recording from one of their hotel evenings, the one in February, nearly 4 months ago. Caleb's voice, slurred and loose, running through the full inventory of his marital grievances while Tessa quietly let it roll. His exact words as Brant read them to him. "She's completely disappeared into that baby. I barely exist in my own house. Half the time I think everybody would be better off if she just took off somewhere and gave me some peace." A long silence on the phone. That recording, Brant said carefully, has been provided to Elena's legal team. Caleb pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. "It's going to be characterized as evidence of intent," Brant said. "Or at minimum, a documented wish that your wife would leave. It significantly complicates the argument that her departure was an act of malice against you." "I was drunk," Caleb said. "It was venting, I believe you," Brant said. "What matters is what a family court judge believes." He paused. "Caleb, I need you to hear me clearly. Do not do anything impulsive. Do not attempt to contact Elena. Do not make any moves that can be characterized as pursuit or threat. You are in a very fragile position, and we need to treat it that way." Caleb hung up the phone. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time. Then he called Silas Vay and asked him how close he was. Silas said close. He found her in Montana. Not Silas technically, Silas found the thread. A rental transaction connected to Mara Quinn's consulting firm. A cabin near Whitefish, rented for 90 days under a corporate name that Mara used for client relocations. Silas told Caleb the location on a Tuesday morning. He also said very clearly that Caleb should not go there himself. That Caleb should give the information to Brant and let the attorneys file the appropriate motions. That going personally with a protective order in place was the kind of move that would cost him everything he was supposedly fighting for. Caleb listened to all of it. He booked a flight to Missoula that afternoon. He told himself he just needed to see his son. Just see him. Not take him, not confront Elena. Just see with his own eyes that Noah was safe, that his boy was okay, that this wasn't theoretical. He told himself that on the plane, in the rental car, on the 2-hour drive north. He believed it right up until he turned down the gravel road toward the cabin and saw Elena standing outside in the morning light with Noah against her chest and felt something close in his throat that was so much. More than just wanting to verify his son was safe. He wanted to reach for them. He wanted to grab back what he was losing. The sheriff's deputy's cruiser was parked near the tree line. A woman he didn't recognize, Mara Quinn, he understood was loading bags into a vehicle. Elena saw him the moment his rental car stopped. She didn't run. She didn't call out to the deputy. She stood completely still and looked at him across the distance between them, and what he saw on her face was not fear, not fury, not the satisfaction of someone who had won something. It was just exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of a woman who had already finished grieving something and was simply waiting for the last part to be over. He got out of the car. His hand found the door handle, and he held it. Noah was awake against Elena's chest, tiny hands, that dark hair. 3 months old. Caleb had been present for approximately 9 of those months' worth of evenings, most of them while looking at his phone. He stood there with the Montana morning cold around him, and the deputy 10 yards away, and Mara watching from across the yard, and he felt the specific weight of what he was holding in his hand, not that car door, but the choice. The moment that would define whatever kind of man came next. He let go of the door. Elena watched him. He got back in the car. He sat there for a minute. maybe 2. Then he turned around and drove back down the gravel road and didn't stop. He drove all the way to Missoula, returned the rental car, sat in the airport for 4 hours, flew back to Seattle, and went directly to Brant's office. He sat across from his attorney. He said, "I went to Montana." Brant's face did something carefully controlled. "Caleb, I didn't approach her. I saw her. I turned around and left." He looked at the desk between them. "I need you to get me into a courtroom." Brant studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me what you're willing to do." Caleb thought about the look on Elena's face, the exhaustion, the finished grief, Noah's dark hair in the Montana morning light. He thought about what she'd said on the phone, the chance to actually be his father, instead of just someone who made him. Whatever it takes, he said. He almost meant it. He wasn't quite there yet. Honesty required him to admit that. He was still angry. He still believed, somewhere underneath everything, that Elena had done something to him. That the money was unfair, that the secrecy was unfair, that he had been handled rather than confronted, and that was its own kind of wrong. But underneath all of that was something newer and quieter and harder to argue with. He had stood 15 yards from his 3-month-old son. He had not known what to say to him. He had not known how to hold him without Elena showing him. He had not known, had genuinely not known, whether Noah still cried the way he had in the first weeks, or whether he'd settled into sleep, or what sound he made when he was hungry, or what Elena did to calm him at 3A. He had not known his son. He had known about his son, the way you know about a country you've never visited. That was the thing that stayed with him on the flight home. Not the protective order, not the recording, not the financial transfers or the photographs or Elena's calm voice on the phone. Just that. He had stood 15 yards from his child and had nothing to offer him. Nothing yet. He looked at Brant. "Whatever it takes," he said again. This time he was a little closer to meaning it. Brant's office had a view of Elliott Bay that cost as much per square foot as anything in the city, and Caleb had never once looked at it during their previous meetings. He looked at it now. The water was gray and flat under an overcast February sky. A container ship was moving toward the sound, slow and enormous, the kind of thing that looked like it wasn't moving at all until you checked it against the fixed point of the opposite shore. "The Montana trip," Brant said from across the desk. "Walk me through exactly what happened. I told you." "Tell me again." "Precisely." Caleb told him again. The gravel road. The rental car. Elena with Noah on her chest. The deputy near the trees. He told it the same way twice, which Brant seemed to need. Brant made notes. His pen moved across the yellow legal pad in a controlled, unhurried way. When Caleb finished the second telling, Brant set the pen down and looked at him with the expression of a man who was deciding how honest to be. "You violated the protective order," Brant said. "I didn't approach her. You were within visual range. The deputy has almost certainly filed a report. Elena's attorney is going to know about Montana before the end of this week, if she doesn't already. I didn't touch anyone. I didn't say anything." Caleb. Brant's voice was quiet and very direct. "The order doesn't require contact. Presence is enough. You drove to a location you knew she was at, with an active restraining order in place. That is a violation. What it costs you depends entirely on what we do in the next 72 hours. The container ship was still moving across the bay. Barely perceptibly, but moving. "What do we do?" Caleb said. "We get ahead of it. You file an acknowledgement with the court that you traveled to Montana and confirm you made no contact. You frame it as a father's desperation to verify his child's safety, not harassment. You enter a parenting course voluntarily today if possible. And you call off Silas Vey. Silas already found her. There's nothing left to find. Then there's nothing left to call off. But if Silas makes any additional contact with Elena's location or her associates, it comes back on you." Brant picked up his pen again. "The image we need to build for the custody hearing is a man who made serious mistakes and is actively correcting them. Every action you take from this moment is either evidence for that image or evidence against it." Caleb looked away from the window. "When's the hearing?" 6 weeks. Possibly sooner if Elena's attorney pushes for an emergency session based on the Montana incident. "Can she do that?" "Yes." Brant looked at him steadily. "She probably will." The emergency session was filed 4 days later. Caleb found out on a Wednesday morning when Brant called him at 7 a.m. Early enough that Caleb was still in the kitchen in yesterday's clothes, having fallen asleep at the table with a cold cup of coffee, and his laptop open to nothing in particular. He'd been doing that, falling asleep in rooms he wasn't supposed to sleep in, waking up stiff and disoriented in the gray Seattle mornings, spending the first 10 seconds of consciousness in the merciful blankness before everything came back. He answered the phone on the first ring. Brant said, Elena's attorney filed this morning. Emergency custody hearing, 4 days from now. They're citing the Montana violation, citing the recording, and citing a pattern of behavior they're calling, and this is their language, willful disregard for the safety and stability of a minor child. Caleb stood up from the table. Noah has been safe with his mother for 3 weeks. There's no danger to cite. The danger they're citing is you, Brant said. Your behavior, your history. They're arguing that you constitute a destabilizing risk. The kitchen felt very small. What do we do? He said. You come to my office at noon. You bring everything I asked you to bring last week, the financial documentation, the phone records from your end, any text history with Elena from the last 18 months. And Caleb. A pause. I need you to come prepared to be honest about things you haven't been fully honest about yet. I've been honest. You've been selectively honest, which is different. Brant didn't say it with judgment. He said it the way he said everything, as a professional assessment of a situation. The recording is going to be admitted. Tessa Vale has retained her own attorney and is cooperating with Elena's legal team. Whatever you told me about the affair, assume that Elena's people know more. He hung up. Caleb put his phone down on the table. He thought about Tessa. He hadn't spoken to Tessa in 3 weeks since the morning after Elena disappeared, when he'd called her in a panic, and she'd answered with the careful, distanced tone of someone who had already decided they were in a different situation than they'd been in the day before. She had said she was sorry about his family. She had said she hoped things worked out. She had said it the way people say things they don't mean because they've concluded that meaning anything is too expensive. He had understood in that phone call that what he'd had with Tessa was not what he'd told himself it was. It had never been what he told himself it was. That understanding didn't help him right now. He went upstairs, showered for the first time in 2 days, put on actual clothes, and drove to Brant's office. Marcus was waiting in the lobby. Caleb stopped when he saw him. Marcus was sitting in one of the low leather chairs near the reception desk, wearing his work coat, holding a paper coffee cup with both hands. He looked up when Caleb came in. What are you doing here? Caleb said. Brant called me. Marcus stood. He thought you might need someone. I don't need a babysitter. Good, because I'm not offering to babysit. Marcus looked at him. You look like you haven't slept in a week. 4 days. Great. Fantastic. Really pulling it together. He held out the second coffee cup that Caleb had noticed he was also holding. Drink this. Caleb took it. It was from the place on 3rd Avenue that Marcus had been going to since they were in their mid-20s. Dark roast, no sugar, the way Caleb always had it. The familiarity of it did something to his chest that he didn't have room for right now. I did something stupid, Caleb said. I know, Brant told me. Marcus's voice didn't have the satisfied weight of someone who had been right. It just had the tired weight of someone who'd been watching something coming for a long time. You flew to Montana. I didn't go near her. But you went. I needed to see Caleb. Marcus said his name the way he'd been saying it since they were 19 flat, quiet, the sound of someone refusing to accept the excuse that's coming. What did you need to see? Caleb looked at the coffee cup. I didn't know if he was safe, he said. Noah has been with his mother. His mother loves him. He was safe. I didn't know that. You knew that. Marcus kept his voice low because the lobby wasn't empty. You knew Elena would never hurt that baby. You know her. What you didn't know was how to sit still and let the process happen without you being the one running it. Caleb didn't answer. That's what the whole thing has been, Marcus said. That's what the affair was. That's what the trips were. That's what Montana was. You cannot stand to be in a situation where you're not the one deciding what happens next. The words landed with the particular precision of something that's been true for a long time, but has never said out loud before. You're supposed to be here as support, Caleb said. I am supporting you. This is what support looks like when the person you're supporting is about to walk into a legal hearing and get taken apart. Marcus put his cup down on the reception desk. I love you like a brother. I have for 15 years. But I have watched you treat that woman like she was part of the infrastructure of your life for 4 years, and I did not say enough about it when I should have. So I'm saying it now. The elevator opened. Brant's assistant appeared. Caleb looked at Marcus for a moment. Say it after, he said. I'll say it as many times as you need it. They went upstairs. Brant's conference room had the yellow legal pads and the cold water pitchers and the stack of tabbed folders that meant this was going to be the kind of meeting you didn't come out of feeling good. Caleb sat down. Marcus sat in the chair along the wall out of the way, where he would stay quiet for the next 2 hours and occasionally look at Caleb with an expression that was not pity and not satisfaction, and was harder to absorb than either. Brant opened the first folder, the recording, he said. I'm going to read you Elena's attorney's characterization of it, which is going to be their framing at the hearing. Quote, the recording demonstrates that Mr. Murcher viewed his wife and infant son as burdens on his quality of life, that he expressed, in his own words, a desire for their absence, and that this desire predates Mrs. Mercer's departure by 4 months, suggesting that her protective action was reasonable and necessary. Caleb said I was drunk. It was a private conversation, which was recorded without your knowledge, which may have evidentiary complications but not enough to exclude it, because Montana is a one-party consent state. We're in Washington. The recording was made in a Washington hotel. Washington is also a one-party consent state. Brant set down the page. The recording comes in. We need to address it directly. The worst thing we can do is minimize it. What's the best thing we can do? We acknowledge it. We contextualize it as the words of a man who is in crisis and behaving badly, not as evidence of intent. We demonstrate that those words were not followed by actions consistent with intent, which is where your recent behavior becomes critical. Brant looked at him. Have you enrolled in the parenting course I mentioned? I called yesterday. They have an opening on Monday. Take it. He made a note. Therapy? A pause. I have an appointment Thursday. Good. Don't cancel it. Brant moved to the next tab. The financial question, the joint account. She took $194,000. From an account in both your names, funded in part by her labor as the primary caregiver for your infant son's labor that has a documented economic value your attorneys will be happy to calculate if we go down that road. Caleb, fighting the financial transfer, is going to read as a wealthy man trying to punish a woman for leaving him. I strongly recommend we let it go. Caleb's jaw tightened. That was our savings. It was. And she used it to protect herself and your child in a situation where she had documented reason to believe she needed protection. Pursuing it will hurt you more than the amount is worth. Brant held his gaze. Let it go, a long beat, Caleb said. The Montana incident. Brant turned to the next tab. Elena's attorney is going to characterize it as stalking. We characterize it as a father driven by genuine fear for his child's safety, who exercised restraint the moment he confirmed his child was secure, who made no contact and immediately returned to Seattle to engage constructively with the legal process. That characterization needs to be consistent with everything else we present. It's consistent. It needs to be consistent with your affect as well as your words, Brant said. When you're in that courtroom, the judge is going to watch how you sit, how you respond, whether your face does something different than what your mouth is saying. Judges do this for a living. They're very good at it. Marcus, from the chair along the wall, said nothing. Just listened. Caleb looked at the table. At the water pitcher, the yellow legal pads, the stack of Brant's tabbed folders that represented his life being sorted into categories. What are my chances, he said. Brant was quiet for a moment. Honest answer? I didn't pay you for the other kind. The affair, the recording, the Montana violation, the documented pattern of absence during Noah's first 3 months, those are significant negatives. The fact that you have no history of violence, no substance abuse record, and stable income and housing works in your favor. The fact that you've initiated therapy and parenting education voluntarily before the hearing that helps. He folded his hands on the table. Best realistic outcome from the emergency hearing, supervised visitation. Limited hours, monitored contact, strict conditions. Full custody remains with Elena pending the primary hearing in 6 weeks. In worst case, no visitation pending the primary hearing. Contact only through legal intermediaries. The room was very quiet. Fight for supervised, Caleb said. That's the plan, Brant said. Detective Holloway called that evening. Caleb almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar until the second ring when he placed it and picked up with the particular wariness of a man who has stopped assuming any call is neutral. Mr. Mercer Holloway's voice had the same unhurried quality it had had in the kitchen 3 weeks ago. I wanted to follow up on a few things. My attorney minus... I'm not calling about the custody matter. That's civil, not my jurisdiction. A pause. I'm calling because Tessa Vale came in this morning to make a voluntary statement, and some of what she said touches on you in ways I thought you'd want to know about. Caleb sat down on the edge of the couch. What kind of statement? He said carefully. She's retained counsel and she's cooperating fully with Elena's legal team. That's her business. What concerns my office is that in the course of that conversation, she mentioned that you made statements to her on multiple occasions indicating awareness that your wife was unhappy and possibly planning to leave. Holloway's tone stayed neutral. Informational. That's relevant to whether Elena's departure was impulsive or whether it was something you had prior awareness of and chose not to address. Tessa is characterizing private conversations to serve her own interests. That may be, but I want to be straightforward with you the way I was at the beginning. He paused. If there are any financial matters related to your marriage that haven't been fully disclosed, any accounts, any transfers, anything else that might surface now, is the time to get ahead of it. Courts don't respond well to surprises. There's nothing. All right, another pause. Mr. Mercer, I've been doing this a long time. The cases that go worst are the ones where somebody decides to manage the situation instead of facing it. The case that tends to have the best outcome, even when the outcome isn't what the person wanted, is the one where somebody stops running the play and just tells the truth. Caleb didn't answer. I appreciate the call, he said. He hung up. He sat on the edge of the couch for a while. He thought about Tessa in an interview room, describing him to people whose job was to use what she said against him. He thought about what she'd heard, what she'd seen, what she'd been careful enough to record. He thought about the version of himself that existed in her account, the version that had sat in hotel rooms complaining about his wife while his wife was home alone with their infant son, and he tried to find a rebuttal. He couldn't find one, not because the legal argument wasn't there. Brant could construct a legal argument. Brant was very good at constructing legal arguments. But the factual argument, the argument that said the man in Tessa's account was a distortion, an unfair portrait, a mischaracterization of who Caleb Mercer actually was, that argument kept running into the same problem. It wasn't a distortion. It was just what he'd been. He picked up his phone, not to call anyone, just to hold it. He thought about Noah's dark hair in the Montana morning, Elena's face, the exhaustion that wasn't about him anymore. He put the phone on the cushion beside him. He thought about Marcus in the conference room chair. That's what the whole thing has been. You cannot stand to be in a situation where you're not the one deciding what happens next. He thought about that for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called the therapist and moved his Thursday appointment to Wednesday morning because waiting until Thursday suddenly seemed like the kind of thing the old version of himself would do. The emergency hearing was on a Tuesday. The courtroom was smaller than Caleb had imagined. He'd built it up in his head into something grand and formal, a stage commensurate with how much was at stake. What he got was a mid-sized room with fluorescent lights and a judge named Carver, who looked like she'd eaten the same lunch for 20 years and had no remaining patience for men who confused entitlement with injury. Elena was already seated at the opposite table when Caleb came in. He hadn't seen her since Montana, and in Montana he'd been 15 yards away, looking at her from across a gravel yard. Here she was 10 feet away, in a dark blazer, her hair pulled back, her hands flat on the table in front of her. She looked thinner than he remembered. She also looked steadier than he'd ever seen her in the last year of their marriage. She didn't look at him when he sat down. He looked at her for a moment anyway. Her attorney, a compact woman named Forsyth, who had the specific manner of someone very good at a thing she had been doing for a long time, opened with the recording. She played 30 seconds of it through a small speaker on the table, and Caleb listened to his own voice, drunk and self-pitying, filling the quiet courtroom with words he had said in February and could not now reach back and unsay. Judge Carver listened. Her expression did not change. Forsyth then outlined the Montana incident in precise clinical detail. The active protective order, the flight to Missoula, the rental car, the gravel road, Caleb's presence at a location he had no legal authority to be near. She presented the PI's report, the original one, from 9 months ago, the photographs Caleb had already seen in Silas's office. She presented the hotel records. She presented the credit card statement showing the pattern of evenings that had not been business trips. She presented it all without theatrics, which was worse than theatrics. Theatrics gave you something to react to. Forsyth simply laid the facts down like stones, one beside the other building a shape. When she finished, Brant presented Caleb's counter-narrative. The voluntary therapy enrollment, the parenting course. The restraint he'd exercised in Montana present but non-approaching, immediately departing. The acknowledgement of his failures delivered without minimization. Brant was very good. Judge Carver listened to him the way she'd listened to Forsyth steadily, with the judicial version of giving nothing away. Then she said, "Mr. Mercer." Caleb looked up. "Tell me, in your own words, why I should grant you any access to your child." The room was very still. Brant had prepared him for versions of this question. They'd spent an hour on it Wednesday morning. Caleb had the answer ready, not scripted exactly, but outlined. The key points. The framing. He opened his mouth. What came out was not the outline. "I don't have a good answer for that," he said. He heard Brant very slightly stop breathing beside him. "I've been trying to build one for 3 weeks," Caleb said. "A reason you should trust me. A case. But any case I make is built on what I've done in the last few weeks. In the last few weeks, through 3 weeks out of 3 months that I wasn't there. That I wasn't present, that I chose not to be." He stopped. Started again. "I'm his father because I was there for his birth, and then I went back to my regular life and left his mother to raise him alone, while I convinced myself that paying the bills was the same thing as being a parent." He looked at the judge. "It's not the same thing." The room stayed still. "I'm not asking for something I've earned," Caleb said. "I'm asking for a chance to start earning it." Judge Carver looked at him for a moment that stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. Then she looked at her notes. Then she said, "I'm going to grant supervised visitation. 2 hours per week at a designated family services center, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. The following conditions apply immediately." She read them. "No contact with Elena outside the structured handoff. Mandatory attendance at the parenting course already in progress. Weekly therapy with documentation provided to the court. Drug and alcohol screening upon request. Any single violation would result in immediate suspension of visitation pending full review." Elena's attorney had pushed for nothing pending the full hearing. The judge had given him 2 hours. 2 hours a week. He would not have the right to hold his son without a monitor in the room. He would not be able to call Elena to discuss Noah's well-being. He could not drive by her house. He could not make contact through third parties. 2 hours a week in a room with a stranger watching. Caleb said, "Thank you, Your Honor." He meant it. Outside the courthouse, Marcus was waiting on the steps. Caleb came through the glass doors and stopped at the top of the steps and felt the February cold move through his coat like it had weight. "How'd it go?" Marcus asked. "Supervised visitation. 2 hours a week." Marcus nodded slowly. "And it's better than nothing." Caleb looked at the street. At the gray Seattle afternoon, the traffic, the ordinary, unremarkable business of a city that had kept moving through all of this. She was in there. "Elena?" 10 feet away. He was quiet for a moment. She looked good. She looked steadier, like she's figured something out. Marcus didn't say anything. "I'm going to screw this up," Caleb said. Not with self-pity, just with the flat honesty of a man taking an accurate measurement. "At some point the next 6 weeks I'm going to do something wrong, because I don't know how to be patient." "Probably," Marcus said. "Thanks," I said probably. "Not definitely." Marcus came down the step to stand beside him. "The difference is you knowing it might happen before it does." They stood there a minute, 2 men on the courthouse steps in the cold. "I have to call Silas," Caleb said. "Silas is done." "You said that, I know. I just stopped. I want to know where she's staying." Marcus turned to look at him. "Not to go," Caleb said quickly. "Not to do anything. I just want to know, Caleb." "I know." He pressed his hand over his face, held it there. "I know. You just told a judge you understand the difference between controlling and caring," Marcus said. In about 60 seconds. Was that true, or was that the performance? Caleb took his hand down. He looked at the street. "Both," he said honestly. "Right now it's still a little bit both." Marcus looked at him with the kind of steadiness that 15 years of actual friendship produces. "Then we work on that," he said. The first supervised visit was on a Friday afternoon. The Family Services Center was a low building in the Beacon Hill neighborhood that smelled like industrial cleaner and the kind of institutional carpet that had absorbed too much from too many difficult days. Caleb arrived 12 minutes early, sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area, and stared at a child's drawing taped to the opposite wall crayon figures, purple sun, the basic optimistic shorthand that children use for the world before they understand the world is more complicated. He'd been sitting there for 9 minutes when the door opened. The monitor, a woman named Patterson who had introduced herself on the phone as calm and professional and had delivered on both, came in first. Then Elena, and she was carrying Noah. Caleb stood up. He didn't mean to. He'd planned to stay seated, to keep everything low-key and managed, to give Elena room, but he stood up before he made the decision to, the same way you stand up when something important enters the room. Elena stopped a few feet away. She held Noah against her chest. Noah was awake, his dark eyes moving around the unfamiliar room with the particular wide alertness of a baby encountering new stimuli. "He's been fed," Elena said. Her voice was controlled, professional. The voice of someone who had thought about how this moment would go and prepared for it. "He's had a nap. He usually goes again around 4. He's been having some gas this week, so if he's fussy, that's likely it." She held out a small card. Feeding schedule. Sleep pattern. Notes on what helped when he was unsettled. Caleb took the card. He looked at it. Then he looked at Noah. "Okay," Caleb said. "Thank you." Elena nodded once, brief and careful. She passed Noah to Patterson, who passed him to Caleb. Noah, in Caleb's arms, went immediately tense. Then he started to cry. Not the mild fussing of an uncomfortable baby, the full, committed cry of an infant in the arms of someone who did not smell right, did not hold right, did not feel like anyone he had learned to recognize as safe. Caleb held him, tried to settle him, did the things Elena's card said to do. Noah cried harder. Elena stood near the door. Patterson stood near the center of the room. Nobody told Caleb what to do. He stood there with his crying son in his arms, in a room that smelled like institutional carpet, in the worst version of a thing he had once imagined, would look completely different, and he made a choice. He stopped trying to make Noah stop crying. He just held him. He kept his arms steady. He kept his voice low, not words, just sound. He swayed slightly, the way you see parents do, the unconscious rhythm that even Caleb's body seemed to know without having practiced it. He didn't try to win the moment. He just stayed in it. After a while, 3 minutes, maybe 4, the longest 4 minutes of his life, Noah's crying dropped from its peak, settled into something smaller, not contentment, not trust. Just the provisional quiet of an infant who has decided the immediate situation may not be an emergency. Caleb exhaled. He looked down at his son. Noah looked back at him with the unfocused intensity of a baby still making sense of the world. Caleb said very quietly, "I know you're scared. I'm here." He didn't say, "I'm your father." He didn't say anything that required Noah to receive it. He just said, "I'm here." Patterson made a note on her clipboard. In the chair by the door, Elena sat with her hands in her lap, watching. Her expression was unreadable, but she didn't look away. Afterward, walking to his car in the parking lot, Caleb stopped beside his truck and stood for a moment in the cold. His phone had 3 messages from Silas Vey. He looked at them. Read the previews. Silas had information, something about Mara Quinn, something about a property transaction in a different county that might indicate Elena's current address. Caleb stood there with the phone in his hand and the February cold pushing through his coat. He thought about Noah's weight in his arms. The cry that had eventually provisionally subsided. He thought about Brandt, about Patterson's clipboard, about what a single phone call to Silas would cost him if it ever surfaced, and things like that always surfaced. He thought about what he'd said to Marcus on the courthouse steps. Right now it's still a little bit both. He closed his messages. He opened his contacts, found Silas's number, and typed, "We're done. Send me your final invoice." He hit send before he could think about it too much. Then he stood in the parking lot for another moment, in the cold, with the silence that comes after you have closed a door that you were not sure you were capable of closing. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the first real thing he had done in a very long time. He got in his truck. He drove home. He did not stop for anything. 2 days later, Silas called anyway. Caleb let it go to voicemail. Then, because he was not yet entirely the person he was trying to be, he listened to the message. Silas's voice, unhurried as always, got your message. Invoice is coming. But I thought you should know, as a professional courtesy, Elena's attorney has obtained something. A text exchange between you and your wife, November of last year. I don't know the full content, but from what I'm hearing, it's going to change the shape of the hearing. A pause. I thought you'd want a heads up. Good luck, Caleb. He sat with the phone in his hand. November. He thought about November. He and Elena had barely spoken in November. She was deep in the third trimester, exhausted and uncomfortable, and he had been... He stopped. He knew which texts. He closed his eyes. In November, Elena had sent him a message at 11:47 p. M. He remembered because he'd been awake at the hotel, and he'd read it and put the phone face down without answering. She had written, I know you're not in Portland. I need you to come home. I can't do this by myself anymore, and I'm scared. He had not come home. He had answered in the morning, from the hotel with, headed back now. Everything okay? She had said fine. She had not been fine. That exchange, her message, his non-answer, his deflection in the morning, was going to be in that courtroom in 6 weeks, laid out beside everything else, one more stone in the shape that Forsyth was building. He sat in the kitchen, the same counter, the wedding ring long since placed in a drawer he didn't open, and understood what the hearing was actually going to look like. Not a battle he might win. A reckoning he had been walking toward for 4 years. He picked up his phone and called Brant. I need to tell you something, he said, when Brant answered. Tell me, Brant said. Caleb told him about the November texts. Brant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, all right. Here's what we're going to do. But even as Brant started talking calm, professional, already building the counter-argument, already finding the angle, Caleb understood that there was no angle that made the November texts into something other than what they were. She had told him she was scared. She had told him she needed him. And he had read that message and put the phone face down and stayed where he was. There was no version of that he could argue his way out of. There was only the question of what he did with the fact of it. And that question, unlike the legal ones, had no attorney who could answer it for him. Brant talked for 11 minutes. Caleb held the phone against his ear and listened, and wrote nothing down because there was nothing to write. Brant was not giving him a plan. Brant was giving him a framework for damage control, which is a different thing. A framework is what you build when the plan has already failed, and you are trying to decide how much of the structure can still be salvaged from the wreckage. When Brant finished, Caleb said, what's the realistic outcome now? A pause that was one beat too long. Supervised visitation, Brant said. Same as the emergency order. We go into the full hearing and we fight to keep what we have. That's the ceiling, for now. Yes, the November texts close off the argument that Elena's departure was impulsive or retaliatory. She documented that she asked for help, that she expressed fear, and that you were unavailable. Combined with the recording, the affair Montana, the narrative against you is complete. Brant paused. What we're fighting for now is not full custody. We're fighting for continued access. We're fighting for the right to keep showing up. Caleb sat with that. Okay, he said. Okay, Brant said like he hadn't expected it to go that smoothly. They hung up. Caleb put his phone face down on the counter. Not the way he'd put it face down in November when Elena's message came through at 11:47 p. M. That had been avoidance. This was just a man setting down a phone, because he had nothing left to do with it tonight. He sat in the kitchen until it got dark outside. He didn't turn on the lights. The Thursday therapy appointment was with a man named Dr. Aldrich, who worked out of an office in Capitol Hill that had 2 plants in it, both of which looked like they were surviving rather than thriving, which Caleb found oddly reassuring. Aldrich was in his late 40s, with reading glasses he took on and off as a kind of conversational punctuation. He didn't take notes during sessions, which was something Caleb had noticed in the first appointment and decided he respected. At the third appointment, the one after the Silas voicemail, after the night sitting in the kitchen in the dark, Caleb sat down in the chair across from Aldrich and said, without preamble, I read a text message in November and put my phone face down and stayed where I was. My wife told me she was scared and I didn't go home. Aldrich took his glasses off. Tell me what you were feeling when you read it, he said. I don't remember. Try. Caleb tried. He went back to November in his head, the hotel room, the low lamp, Tessa asleep, his phone lighting up on the nightstand. He remembered picking it up with the automatic reflex of a man who always checked his messages. He remembered reading Elena's words. I know you're not in Portland. I need you to come home. I can't do this by myself anymore, and I'm scared. Trapped, he said finally. I felt trapped. By what? But he stopped. By the fact that if I went home, I'd have to explain where I was. And if I explained where I was, everything would be over. So you stayed. So I stayed. Aldrich put his glasses back on, and the part where she said she was scared. Caleb looked at the plant on the windowsill, the one that was barely making it. I told myself she was fine, he said, that she was exaggerating. She did that. She sent messages late at night when she was exhausted, and everything felt worse than it was. He paused. That's what I told myself. Did you believe it? A long silence. No, Caleb said. Aldrich didn't write it down. He didn't need to. He just let it sit in the air between them, which was worse than writing it down, because a written thing can be reviewed and argued with. A thing sitting in the air is just true. I knew she wasn't fine, Caleb said. And I stayed anyway. The full custody hearing was 28 days away when Forsyth filed the supplemental evidence package. Brandt called at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. Caleb was at the kitchen table with coffee, the parenting book he'd been assigned in the course. Open in front of him, he'd been reading the chapter on infant attachment, which had been doing uncomfortable things to his understanding of Noah's first 3 months. They filed a supplemental, Brandt said. I'm going through it now. There's more than the November texts. Caleb closed the book. How much more? Elena kept a journal. Brandt's voice stayed professional, but there was something careful underneath it. Digital password protected. Her attorney has excerpts. She chose to provide them voluntarily. 18 months of entries. Caleb said nothing. They document, Brandt continued, reading from what Caleb imagined was his screen, a pattern of emotional absence, including specific instances where Elena requested couples counseling and was refused. 3 requests. The last one was in August, 2 months before Noah was born. I didn't refuse. I said we'd look into it. According to the journal entry, and I'm paraphrasing, you said you didn't have time for that right now and changed the subject. Brandt paused. Was that accurate? Caleb thought about August. He'd been closing the distribution contract with the regional chain. He'd been working 14-hour days. Elena, 8 months pregnant, had sat across from him at the kitchen table and said something about talking to someone together, and he had said, I don't have time for that right now. He had absolutely changed the subject. It was accurate, he said. There are also entries documenting the nights you didn't come home. Not characterizations, times, dates, her emotional state, what she told Noah while she was feeding him at 2A. M to keep herself from Brandt stopped. From what? A pause, from falling apart. The kitchen was very quiet. She wrote to him, Brandt said, in the journal. Entries addressed directly to Noah, telling him that his father was going to come around, that he just needed time, that she was going to hold things together.
He stopped again.
Caleb, this is going to be read in that courtroom. Caleb put his hand flat on the closed parenting book. Can we challenge it? He said. On what grounds? She provided it voluntarily. It's contemporaneous documentation of the home environment during Noah's first 3 months. It's directly relevant to the custody determination. Brandt's voice stayed level. No, we cannot challenge it. Then what do we do? We let it be read, Brandt said, and you sit there and you do not react. You do not defend yourself. You listen, and you let the judge see a man who can hear the truth about himself without deflecting. Caleb stared at the book cover. Can you do that? Brandt said. He thought about the journal entries. Elena at 2A. M, writing to their son about a father who might still come around. Elena telling an infant who could not understand language yet, but was hearing the sound of his mother's voice pulling herself together that things would be okay. I don't know, Caleb said. That's the most honest thing you've told me, Brandt said. Work on it. He called Marcus that afternoon. Not because Marcus would have useful legal advice. Because there was something he needed to say out loud to someone who had known him long enough to absorb it without turning it into something else. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring. He was at his office. Caleb could hear the background sound of the architecture firm where Marcus had worked for 9 years. She kept a journal, Caleb said, without greeting. A beat. Elena? 18 months. She wrote in it every time I wasn't home. Every time she asked for something and I said I was busy. She wrote to Noah in it, about me. He stopped. About how she was going to hold things together until I figured it out. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said, they're going to read it in court. Okay, Marcus. Caleb's voice was tight in a way he couldn't fully control. She was alone. She was home alone with a baby, and she was writing him letters about his father because she didn't have anyone else to. He stopped. Why didn't she call someone? Who would she have called? Marcus said carefully. Her sister, a friend. Someone. Her sister lives in Phoenix and doesn't like you. Her closest friend in the last year has been Mara Quinn, who was helping her plan her exit. And Caleb. Marcus paused. You were the person she was supposed to be able to call. The line sat quiet. I know, Caleb said. Do you? Because you just asked why she didn't call someone else, and the answer is because you were supposed to be someone else. Caleb sat with that. I'm going to lose the hearing, he said. You're going to lose full custody, Marcus said. That's different. You might keep visitation. You keep showing up to that. You keep going to therapy. You keep doing the course in a year, maybe 2. You build something real. That's the actual path, man. That's the one that exists. 2 hours a week. It's 2 hours more than she had to give you. The hearing was on a Tuesday in March. Seattle had been doing the thing it did in March, gray and wet in a way that wasn't dramatic, just relentless. The kind of weather that doesn't give you anything to react to, just wears you down by being there. Caleb wore the dark suit Brant had specified. He'd slept 4 hours. He'd eaten breakfast because Brant told him to. He'd driven to the courthouse without music or radio, just the sound of the windshield wipers and the rain. He was early. He sat in the courthouse lobby for 20 minutes, watching the building fill up with the ordinary business of a legal system, processing its daily caseload. People in good shoes and people in bad shoes. People who looked like they knew where they were going, and people who very clearly did not. Brant arrived at 8:40 and sat beside him. How are you? Brant asked. Ready, Caleb said. Brant looked at him. That's not what I asked. I know. Caleb looked at the lobby doors. I'm not going to fall apart in there. I know you're not. Brant paused. Today is about Noah. Every answer you give, every time you open your mouth, it's about what's right for him. Not what you want. Not what's fair. What's right for him. I understand. I need you to understand it in your body, not just your head. Because your body has been running a different program for 34 years, and it's going to want to take over in there. Caleb looked at him. I know, he said. They went in. Forsyth opened with the journal. She didn't read all of it. She read selected entries, and she read them in the flat, precise voice of an attorney who understands that understatement does more damage than performance. The first entry was from when Noah was 11 days old. Elena had written, he was up 3 times last night. Caleb came home at 10, ate the dinner I'd kept warm, and was asleep by 10:30. I didn't tell him about the 2 a.m. feed, because tell him feels like asking for something he's already decided he doesn't have. The second entry, 6 weeks later, Noah smiled today. A real one, not gas, the actual thing. I took 17 pictures. Caleb was in Portland. I sent him 3 of them, and he said cute, and then asked me where the blue shirt was. The third entry, from November, 9 days after the text message Caleb had left face down on the nightstand, I think I've been waiting for him to see us. I've been doing that for 3 years, actually. I'm starting to understand that waiting is something I chose, not something that was done to me. I don't know what to do with that yet. The fourth entry was one of the ones addressed to Noah. Forsyth read it without inflection, Noah. Your dad is a complicated man. I think he loves you the way he loves things from a distance, on his own terms, when it's convenient. I don't say that to make you angry at him someday. I say it so that you know whatever he does or doesn't do, his choices are his, not yours. You are already more than enough. The courtroom was quiet in the way that spaces are quiet when everyone in them is very carefully not looking at each other. Caleb sat at his table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him. He did not move. He thought about Elena writing that entry. The timestamp had been 3:17 a.m. He thought about his son, 11 days old, 6 weeks old, 3 months old in the room next to where his mother was writing those words into the dark. He did not move. Brant beside him did not look at him. Forsyth continued. She moved from the journal to the financial analysis, the 14 months of credit card statements laid against the household budget, demonstrating the gap between Caleb's personal spending and what Elena had available for household and infant expenses. The hotel visits, the dinners, the transactions on evenings he'd claimed to be working late. She moved to a timeline, a visual aid, simple and devastating, a calendar of Noah's first 12 weeks of life, with Caleb's documented presence marked in one color and his documented absence in another. The absence was the dominant color. Then she called her witness. Caleb had not known there would be a witness. Brant had not known. Either he went very still beside Caleb in a way that telegraphed the surprise without voicing it. The witness was a woman named Dr. Carol Yoon. She was a pediatric family psychologist who had been retained to evaluate Noah's attachment development and the potential impact of custody arrangements on his well-being. She was in her 50s. She had gray-streaked hair and the particular self-possession of someone who had testified in family courts many times and found the experience neither pleasant nor particularly unpleasant, just work. Forsyth took her through her credentials. Then she asked Dr. Yoon, based on your evaluation, what is the primary attachment figure for Noah Mercer? His mother, Yuan, said, without question. And what does research indicate about disrupting the primary attachment relationship for an infant of Noah's age? Significant disruption to the primary caregiver relationship at this developmental stage carries measurable risks for emotional regulation, stress response development, and long-term attachment security. She paused. The shorter answer is, at 4 months old, separation from the primary attachment figure is something we want to minimize. And in your professional opinion, what custody arrangement would best serve Noah's developmental needs? Primary residence with his mother. Structured, predictable contact with his father, gradually increased as the father demonstrates consistency and the child develops familiarity with him. Forsyth said thank you. She sat down. Brant rose for cross-examination. He was good. He established that Yuan had not evaluated Caleb directly, that her findings were based on Elena's account and her observation of Noah, that the research on attachment applied to disruption of the existing arrangement and did not speak against building a paternal relationship. He walked Yuan through the evidence of Caleb's recent engagement, the parenting course, the therapy, the supervised visits. Yuan acknowledged all of it, she said. What I can tell you is that the evidence suggests Mr. Mercer is beginning to engage. What I cannot tell you is whether that engagement will be sustained. The court will have to make a determination based on the full picture. Brant sat down. Judge Carver looked at her notes for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Mercer, you may address the court. This was the part Brant had prepared him for. The direct address, not cross-examination, not responding to a question, but standing up and speaking directly. Brant had given him a structure. 3 minutes, roughly. Acknowledge the failures. Demonstrate the change. Ask for the chance. Caleb stood up. He had the structure in his head. He had the shape of the 3 minutes, the beats, the phrasing Brant, and he had worked on over 2 sessions. He looked at the judge. Then he looked for just a moment at Elena. She was looking at him. Not the way she'd looked at him in the lobby in Montana, not with the finished exhaustion of someone done grieving. She was looking at him with something more complicated. Something that was still measuring. He looked back at Judge Carver. Your Honor, he said, I could give you a prepared statement. I have one. But I think you've been listening to prepared statements all morning, and I don't think one more is going to tell you anything you need to know. Brant, beside him, made a small, controlled movement. What I can tell you, Caleb said, is that I read those journal entries this morning for the first time. My attorney shared them with me after the supplemental filing. And the thing that he stopped, took a breath, the entry about Noah's first smile. My wife took 17 pictures. I got 3 of them, and I said, cute. He looked at the judge. That was my son's first smile. And I said, cute, and moved on to asking where a shirt was. Because that was the scale I was operating at. That was how small everything that wasn't me had become. The room was still. I'm not asking you to trust me based on 3 weeks of parenting classes, Caleb said. I'm not asking you to weigh 6 months of failure against 17 days of doing the right things. That would be a bad trade, and you'd be right not to make it. What I'm asking for is the minimum, the smallest possible amount of access enough to keep building. Because if you take that away, there's no path. 2 hours a week isn't enough time to become his father. But it's more than 0, and 0 is permanent in a way that I don't think serves him. He sat down. Brant's hand under the table briefly pressed his forearm. Not approval, exactly, just acknowledgement. Judge Carver looked at her notes for a long moment. Then she looked up. I've reviewed the complete record in this case, she said. The documented history of Mr. Mercer's absence during the most critical period of his child's development is significant. The recording, the financial analysis, the November communications, these paint a consistent picture of a man who had the capacity to be present and chose not to be. She looked at Caleb. I also see evidence of a genuine shift in the past several weeks. The question before this court is whether that shift is sustainable or whether it is situational, a response to crisis, rather than a fundamental change in character. She picked up her pen. I am maintaining the supervised visitation order. 2 hours weekly monitored contact. I am adding a condition. Mercer will submit a written summary of each therapy session to the court within 48 hours. I am scheduling a review hearing in 90 days. She paused. At that hearing, I will be looking for one thing. Not accomplishments, not certificates or attendance records. I will be looking for evidence that Mr. Mercer understands not intellectually, but practically what it means to prioritize someone else's needs above his own. If I see that, we discuss expanding access. If I don't,
She let that sit.
we're done here. She gathered her papers. The bailiff called the close of the session. Caleb sat without moving while the room began to empty around him. Brant started putting his files away. Across the aisle, Forsyth was speaking quietly with Elena. Elena was listening, nodding, her posture still controlled, still composed. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the door. She was going to pass within a few feet of him. He didn't plan to say anything. He knew the order. No direct contact outside the structured handoff. Brant had been clear. Every attorney in the room had been clear. But Esna slowed as she passed. She didn't stop. She didn't turn to face him. She just slowed for 2 steps, and in those 2 steps she said, without looking at him, quiet enough that only he could hear it. She wrote that entry about the smile because she wanted him to have a record of it. In case you never asked. Then she walked out. Caleb sat very still. Brant was beside him, closing his briefcase, talking about the 90-day timeline. His voice was professional and organized, and full of the next set of things Caleb needed to do. Caleb heard it from somewhere behind a wall of glass. She wanted him to have a record of it, in case you never asked. Elena had written that entry not to document his failure. She had written it because she didn't trust that Caleb would ever want to know, and she wanted Noah to have the memory of his own first smile, even if his father never thought to preserve it. She had been keeping records of his son's life because she had calculated accurately that Caleb wouldn't. He stood up. He felt something move through him that was not guilt. He'd been living with guilt for weeks. He knew its texture. This was different. This was the specific focused impact of understanding something not as a concept, but as a weight. Elena at 3 a.m., photographing Noah's first smile, sending 3 pictures to a man who said cute, and then sitting down to write the moment into a journal so that her son would have it. The care that took, the loneliness underneath that care. Caleb. Brant's hand on his arm. We need to go. He went. He drove home without remembering the drive. He was sitting in his driveway when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Mercer. A voice he didn't recognize. Female, businesslike. My name is Agent Diane Walsh. I'm with the Washington State Financial Crimes Unit. Do you have a few minutes? He stared at his garage door. What is this about? He said. It's about Caleb Mercer Logistics and a series of financial transactions between your company and a distribution partner over the past 14 months. A pause. Specifically, transactions that appear in your company records, but do not appear to have corresponding documentation on the other end. The cold came back, different from the cold in the courthouse. This was internal, chest level. I don't understand what you're describing, he said. I think you might, Walsh said, and her tone didn't change at all, which was somehow the most frightening thing about it. We've been in contact with your distribution partner Ridgeline Supply. Their legal team reached out to us 6 weeks ago after an internal audit flagged discrepancies. The discrepancies trace back to invoices submitted by your company that Ridgeline has no record of authorizing. Caleb's hand was tight on the phone. I'd like to sit down with you informally, Walsh said, to give you a chance to explain the accounting before this moves to a formal investigation. That window closes at the end of the week. He sat in his car in his driveway. He thought about Ridgeline, about the contract, about 14 months of invoices, about the accelerated revenue he'd used to cover the hotel bills, the extravagance, the 6 months of a parallel life that had cost more than he'd budgeted for. He thought about Brant. He thought about the custody hearing that had ended 2 hours ago. The 90-day review. the judge's specific words, whether that shift is sustainable or whether it is situational. He thought about Noah's first smile. 17 photographs. Cute. I'll need to speak with my attorney before I agree to any meeting, he said. Of course, Walsh said, I'd expect nothing less. She gave him a number. End of the week, Mr. Mercer. She hung up. He sat in the car. The rain had started again, the Seattle March rain, relentless and undramatic, just there, just wearing everything down. He called Brant. Brant answered on the second ring. We have a problem, Caleb said. A silence that lasted exactly as long as it took Brant to understand, from the sound of Caleb's voice, that this was not a manageable problem, not a chess move, not something that legal strategy could architecture around. Tell me, Brant said. Caleb told him. When he finished, Brant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Caleb, I need you to tell me, right now did you submit fraudulent invoices to Ridgeline Supply? The rain on the windshield, the garage door in front of him. His son's face in the supervised visit room, wet with crying until it provisionally wasn't. I need you to answer me, Brant said. And Caleb, for the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate, answered a direct question with the complete, unedited, nowhere-to-hide truth. Brant didn't speak for a long time after Caleb finished. The rain kept coming down on the windshield. The garage door stayed closed in front of him. The street behind him was empty in the way Seattle streets are empty on a Tuesday afternoon in March when the weather has convinced everyone to be somewhere else. How many invoices? Brant said finally. 14. Over 11 months. Total amount. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered it like one. 83,000. Give or take. Another silence. Longer this time. Caleb. Brant's voice had changed. Not colder exactly. More careful. The way a man is careful when he is handling something that could break in a direction he can't predict. I'm your attorney of record for the custody matter. What you're describing is a criminal matter. I cannot advise you on both simultaneously. There's a conflict. I know. You need a criminal defense attorney today. Before you speak to Walsh again, before you speak to Ridgeline's legal team, before you speak to anyone who is not your own criminal counsel. I know that too. Then why are you calling me? Caleb looked at the garage door. Because I didn't know who else to call, he said. The rain. Brant exhaled. Okay, I'm going to give you a name. Write it down. The criminal attorney's name was Paula Reeves. She worked out of a firm on 2nd Avenue with a view of the Pike Place market and the kind of office that communicated, without saying it directly, that she was very expensive and very good and that those two things were connected. She was 52. She had short gray hair and the particular stillness of a person who does not waste energy on performance. She listened to Caleb's account of the Ridgeline situation without interrupting, without writing anything down, without her expression shifting by a single degree. When he finished, she said, Tell me about the invoices. How were they structured? Caleb told her. He'd invoiced Ridgeline for consultant services under a subsidiary entity he'd created 14 months ago, a paper company, technically real, registered in Washington, but without staff, without deliverables, without anything it had supposedly provided. The invoices looked legitimate. The amounts were under the threshold that typically triggered internal audit flags. Ridgeline's accounts payable had processed them for 11 months before someone, somewhere, had looked at the cumulative total and asked what exactly they'd received for $83,000. The answer was nothing. Where did the money go? Reeves said. Operating expenses, Caleb said. Personal expenses. The hotel bills. Some of it covered a shortfall in payroll one month when a client payment was late. So it went into your general cash flow. Yes. Reeves looked at him steadily. And you understood when you created the subsidiary and submitted the first invoice that there was no legitimate service being provided. He met her eyes. Yes, he said. She nodded, not approvingly. Just receiving the information. All right, she said. Here's where you are. The Financial Crimes Unit reaching out for an informal conversation before formal investigation is standard. It's also a courtesy they're not required to extend, and that they extend because it serves their interests. They want information, and informal conversations are easier to conduct than formal ones. Agent Walsh is giving you a window to cooperate before the window closes, and she is doing that because cooperation materially affects the outcome. What kind of outcome are we talking about? Wire fraud, at minimum. Possibly mail fraud, depending on how the invoices were transmitted. Potentially tax implications. She paused. If this is the full extent, 14 invoices, one company, 11 months, and if you cooperate fully, provide complete documentation, and make restitution before any formal charge is filed, the realistic range is a fine and probation. Possibly a suspended sentence. Possibly. These things are rarely certain. She held his gaze. The factor that concerns me most is the timing. The custody hearing. The custody hearing, she confirmed. A criminal investigation, even an informal one, even one that resolves favorably, creates a significant complication for your custody position. Your attorney in the family matter will need to know. Brandt already knows. Then he already understands what I'm about to tell you. She folded her hands on the desk. If this surfaces in the custody proceedings, and it very likely will, the court is going to ask itself whether the man requesting access to a child is someone capable of sustained dishonesty. The invoices ran for 11 months. That's not an impulsive mistake. That's a sustained choice. Caleb said nothing. I'm not telling you this to discourage you, Reeves said. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that the decisions you make in the next 72 hours will affect both matters simultaneously. The best path forward on the criminal side, full cooperation, complete honesty, immediate restitution, is also the only path that gives you any credibility in the custody matter. She paused. They're the same decision. He thought about what Brandt had said months ago at the very beginning of all this. Everything is the same conversation now. When do we meet with Walsh, she said. Thursday, Reeves said. I'll make the call. Marcus came over that evening. Caleb hadn't asked him to. He hadn't called anyone. But Marcus showed up at 7 with a bag of food from the Thai place on Capitol Hill that they'd been ordering from since 2014, and he let himself in with the spare key Caleb had given him 3 years ago, and apparently never asked back. He set the food on the kitchen table. He looked at Caleb sitting on the couch in the dim living room. Lights, Marcus said. What? Turn on a light. Sitting in the dark makes everything worse. Caleb reached over and turned on the lamp beside the couch. Marcus came and sat in the chair across from him. He didn't open the food. He just looked at Caleb the way he'd been looking at him for the last several weeks, not with pity, not with judgment, just with the steady attention of someone who has decided to stay. How bad? Marcus said. Bad, the custody hearing or the other thing? Caleb looked at him. You already know. Brandt called me. He figured I was the closest thing to a support system you had. Marcus paused. He wasn't wrong. He didn't tell me details. He told me you'd had a hard day and I should check on you. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm checking on you. How bad? Caleb Nibble told him. Not with the careful legal structure he'd used with Ruzbz, not with the managed accounting of a man in a meeting. Just the plain version, the subsidiary, the invoices, the hotel bills, the gap he'd been covering for 11 months with money that wasn't his. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, Marcus sat back. $83,000, he said? Yes, to cover hotel rooms. And other things, but mostly. Markins looked at the ceiling. Then back at Caleb. Man, no, that's not Caleb, that's not desperation money. That's not somebody's lights getting cut off. That's hotel rooms. I know. You knew it was wrong when you did it. Yes, Marcus shook his head slowly, not in disgust exactly. In the specific fatigue of someone who has watched a capable person make a sustained and avoidable catastrophe. What happens now? Thursday I meet with the financial crimes investigator. I cooperate fully. I make restitution. Reeves thinks if I wire the full amount back before the formal investigation opens, it significantly changes the likely outcome. Do you have $83,000? I can get it. I have to liquidate some things. He paused. I can get it. And the custody case. Brandt says this complicates the 90-day review significantly. The judge wanted to see evidence of sustained change. What she's going to get instead is evidence that I've been conducting financial fraud simultaneously with attending parenting classes. Marcus looked at him. Yeah, Caleb said, so what do you do? The same thing I do with the criminal matter. Cooperate. Tell the truth. Make the restitution. Show up. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. And hope that a judge can hold two things at once, that a man can be doing something dishonest in one area while genuinely trying to change in another. Can they? I don't know. He looked at the lamp. I don't know if I can hold those two things at once either. I don't know what it says about me that I was going to parenting class and writing therapy summaries and going to those supervised visits, and the whole time there were 14 fraudulent invoices sitting in Ridgeline's system. What does it say about you? Caleb thought about it. That change isn't clean, he said finally. That you don't just flip a switch and become a different person. That the old versions of yourself keep running in the background even while you're trying to build something new. He looked at Marcus. I don't know if that's a defense or just an explanation. It's probably both, Marcus said. He finally reached over and opened the bag of food. He put a container in front of Caleb. Eat something, he said. Caleb ate something. Thursday came fast and gray and cold. The Financial Crimes Unit office was in a building on Fifth Avenue that looked like every other government building functional, slightly underfunded, the kind of place where the waiting room chairs had been chosen for durability rather than any other quality. Reeves met him in the lobby. She was in a dark blazer, carrying a briefcase, and she looked at him with the calm assessment of a doctor checking a patient before a procedure. Ready? She said. No, he said. Good answer. She started walking. Follow my lead. Answer what you're asked. If I put my hand on the table, stop talking. Don't volunteer anything I haven't prepared you to volunteer. Agent Walsh was a woman in her early 40s with the particular precision of a federal investigator. Everything about her was controlled. From her posture to her word choice to the exact angle at which she placed her notepad on the table between them. She had a colleague with her, a younger man named Ortiz, who took notes and said almost nothing. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Caleb told the truth, all of it, the subsidiary. The first invoice he remembered the exact date, which seemed to matter to Walsh. The escalation over 11 months. The specific expenses the money had covered. The moment 8 months in, when he'd understood clearly that what he was doing was not a gray area, and had kept doing it anyway. Walsh asked her questions with the methodical patience of someone who already knows the answers and is checking whether you know them too. Ortiz wrote. Reeves interjected twice, once to clarify the legal framing of a question, once to redirect a line of inquiry that was moving into territory she hadn't cleared. At the end, Walsh closed her notepad. Mr. Mercer, she said, I appreciate your candor. Given the cooperation you've demonstrated today, and subject to the completion of full restitution, I'm prepared to recommend against formal prosecution and toward a civil resolution with the state. She paused. That recommendation is contingent on no additional financial irregularities surfacing in the audit of your company records. There are no additional irregularities, Caleb said. Walsh looked at him for a moment. We'll verify that. I know, he said. He transferred the $83,400 from his personal account the following morning. He sold the truck that afternoon not because he had to, but because keeping it felt wrong in a way he couldn't precisely articulate and didn't try to. He drove Marcus's old Civic home. Marcus didn't say anything about the truck. He just handed over the keys without ceremony. Brandt called the afternoon after the Walsh meeting. His voice had the careful precision of a man about to say something he'd been thinking about how to say for several days. The financial matter, he said. I have to disclose it to the court. I know. I wanted to make sure you knew before I filed. A pause. It's going to land hard. I know that too. Caleb. The 90-day review is in 6 weeks. The judge told you specifically that she was looking for evidence of fundamental change. A financial fraud investigation, even one that resolves without prosecution, it's not going to look like fundamental change. What's it going to look like? Like a man who is very good at performing accountability in rooms that matter while continuing to behave badly in rooms that don't. Brandt paused. That's not my read of the situation. I believe you've been genuinely trying. But the read I believe is not the one that's going to be offered in that courtroom. Caleb sat with it. What do I do? He said. You do what you've been doing. You show up to the visits. You write the therapy summaries. You complete the course. Brandt's voice steadied. And at the review hearing, you don't try to contextualize the financial matter. You don't explain it. You don't frame it. You don't construct a narrative around it. You acknowledge it directly, and you let what you've done in the last 6 weeks speak louder than what you did in the 11 months before. Will it? Brandt was quiet. I don't know, he said. And it was the first time in all of this that Caleb had heard Brandt say those 3 words without a strategy attached to them. The supervised visits continued through March and into April. Every Friday afternoon, 2 p.m., the Family Services Center in Beacon Hill with its institutional carpet and Patterson's clipboard. Noah was 4 months old, then 5. He was growing in the particular fast way that infants grow not gradually but in sudden jumps, like a stop-motion film, where the gaps between frames are weeks. His face was losing the newborn softness and becoming more specific, more himself. He had Elena's coloring, and Caleb thought his own jaw a feature he noted with something complicated that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite grief. By the third week of March, Noah had stopped crying when Caleb held him. Not immediately, he still took 5 minutes to settle, still went tense at the initial transfer, still turned his head toward the door where Elena had exited, as if checking whether she was still accessible. But the crying stopped becoming automatic. Caleb understood from the parenting course what that meant. It meant Noah's nervous system was beginning to register him as known. Not safe, not yet, but known. That was something. Caleb had started talking to him during the visits. Not in the cooing register that he'd felt self-conscious about in the first weeks, but in a low, ordinary voice describing what he saw out the window, telling Noah about the city, about the shipping lanes, about a trip he'd taken once to the Oregon coast when he was 26, and how the sea stacks looked like something that had been there since before anything that mattered. Patterson noted on her clipboard that Mr. Mercer was demonstrating appropriate interactive engagement. Caleb didn't care about the clipboard. He cared about the way Noah's eyes tracked his face when he talked. The specific attention of it. A 4-month-old couldn't understand words but understood the pattern of voice, the rhythm of attention, the difference between someone talking at you and someone talking to you. Caleb was trying very hard to talk to him. The 4th week of March, Elena came into the handoff room. She usually waited outside. The protocol was Patterson handling the transfer Elena past Noah to Patterson in the entryway. Patterson brought him in. Caleb's 2 hours happened. Patterson returned him to Elena in the entryway. Clean, no direct contact. But on that Friday, Patterson came to the door and said, "Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer is asking if she can have a word before the visit." He looked up from where he was sitting. Is that within the order?" "Brief communication related to Noah's welfare is permitted under the order," Patterson said. She held the door open. Elena came in. She was in a coat, still wearing it, like she didn't intend to stay long. She had Noah on her hip. She looked at Caleb with the same measuring quality she'd had at the custody hearing, not cold, not open, but watching. "He has an ear infection," she said. "The pediatrician saw him Tuesday. He's on antibiotics. He may be fussier than usual the 3rd day, so he should be past the worst of it, but I wanted you to know." "Thank you," Caleb said. A pause. Elena looked at him. Not at the room, not at Patterson, at him specifically. "He's been asking for you," she said. Caleb blinked. "He's 5 months old." "I know." Something moved across her face. Not softness exactly. Recognition. He hears something, a door, a low voice, and he turns toward it. "He started doing it this week. I don't know what to do with that information, but I thought..." She stopped. "I thought you should have it." He looked at her. "Elena," he said, and then couldn't find what came after it. Every sentence that assembled itself felt wrong, too much, too little, aimed at something she hadn't offered. "The ear infection," she said. "If he seems in pain, hold him upright. It helps with the pressure." She passed Noah to Patterson. She left. Caleb sat with his son for 2 hours and thought about what she'd said. He hears something, and he turns toward it. He held Noah upright when Noah got fussy, and it helped with the pressure, and Noah's fussing subsided. And somewhere in the middle of that practical, small act, holding a baby at an angle, because his ears hurt, Caleb felt something that was nothing like what he'd expected fatherhood to feel like. Nothing cinematic, nothing earned. Just a man holding his son in the right position, because he'd been told how and had listened. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything he hadn't known to value. The 90-day review hearing was on a Monday in late April. He wore the same dark suit. He slept 5 hours. He ate breakfast. He drove himself, this time no Marcus, no Brant picking him up. Just Caleb and the old Civic and the familiar route to the courthouse that he now knew well enough to drive without thinking about it. Brant was already in the lobby when he arrived. "The disclosure landed," Brant said, without preamble. "Forsyth's filing on the financial matter came in this morning. She's requesting the court consider it as evidence of ongoing dishonesty." How does Carver take something filed this morning? She may not admit it formally, but judges read their pre-session briefs. She knows. Caleb looked at the lobby doors. "Then she knows," he said. The courtroom was the same room, the same fluorescent lights, the same institutional furniture. Judge Carver looked the same, unhurried, unjudged, already several steps ahead of everyone in the room in terms of having processed the information. Forsyth went first. She addressed the financial matter directly. She read from the disclosure, framing the Ridgeline invoices as evidence that Caleb's pattern of self-dishonesty extended beyond his marriage, that the sustained choice to defraud a business partner across 11 months was consistent with the sustained choice to deceive his wife across 6 months, and that both demonstrated a character orientation that the court should weigh heavily in determining what environment was safe for Noah. She was clinical, she was precise, she was very, very effective. Brandt countered with the cooperation, the immediate transparency with Walsh, the full restitution paid within 48 hours of the initial contact, the criminal investigation resolving without prosecution. He connected it to the therapy documentation, 6 weeks of session summaries demonstrating genuine self-examination. He presented the parenting course completion certificate. He presented Patterson's visit reports, 12 weeks of supervised visits, 0 violations, growing engagement. He argued that the financial matter, while serious, had been handled with exactly the transparency and accountability that the court had asked Caleb to demonstrate in all areas of his life. He was also very effective. Judge Carver listened to both without reaction. Then she looked at Caleb. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I want to ask you something that doesn't appear in any of these filings." "Yes, Your Honor." "When did you understand, not intellectually, but actually understand that your son needed you to be a different person than you'd been?" The room was quiet. Caleb thought about the question carefully, not constructing an answer, actually thinking. "In the supervised visit room," he said. "The first one. Noah was crying. I couldn't make him stop. And I stopped trying to make him stop and just held him. And he quieted down eventually. Not because of anything I did exactly. Just because I stayed." He paused. "I think that was the first time in my life I understood that being present wasn't the same as performing presence. That staying in something uncomfortable and not trying to control the outcome was the thing." He looked at the judge. "I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for." "I'm not looking for an answer," Carver said. "I'm listening for truth." She made a note. Then she looked at both tables. "The court has reviewed 6 weeks of documentation. The visits, the therapy, the course completion, the financial disclosure and its resolution." She set down her pen. "The court has also reviewed the pattern of behavior that preceded these 6 weeks. And the court is holding both of those things simultaneously, because that is what this child's life will require a court, and eventually Noah himself, holding both things at once. What his father has been, what his father is trying to become." She picked up her papers. "I am expanding the visitation to 4 hours per week, unsupervised, at a mutually agreed location outside the Family Services Center. Handoff remains structured. No direct communication between the parties outside the custody arrangement. A further review is scheduled for 90 days. 4 hours. Unsupervised." Caleb's hands were flat on the table. He kept them there. Across the aisle, Elena was very still. Forsyth leaned toward Elena and said something quietly. Elena listened, nodded once. She didn't look at Caleb. "This court," Carver said, "will be watching the next 90 days with attention. I want to be clear about what that means. The question before this court is no longer whether Mr. Mercer can perform accountability. It is whether he can sustain it when no one is watching." The supervised visits had a monitor in the room. The financial matter had a federal investigator applying pressure. The next 90 days will have neither. She looked at Caleb directly. "What you do with your son in those 4 hours each week, when Patterson is not in the corner with her clipboard, that is what will determine what happens at the next hearing." She gathered her documents. "We're adjourned." Brandt shook his hand in the corridor outside. "That's a real win," Brandt said. "Unsupervised." "I know. How are you feeling?" Caleb looked at the corridor. The same courthouse fluorescent light, the same industrial floor. "Scared," he said. Brandt looked at him. "Of what?" "Of screwing it up when nobody's watching." He turned to face Brandt fully. In the visits, Patterson was there. Walsh was watching the financial thing. Aldrich takes notes on the sessions. There's always been someone in the room." He paused. "What if I'm only the person I've been trying to be because of the room?" Brandt was quiet for a moment. "That's the right thing to be scared of," he said. "The wrong thing would be being scared of the hearing." Caleb looked at him. The first unsupervised visit, Brant said. What are you going to do? Caleb thought about it. Take him to the park, he said. There's one 4 blocks from my house. With a pond. I don't know if 5-month-olds care about ponds, but I figure I'll find out. Brant nodded. Let me know how it goes, he said. The first unsupervised visit was a Saturday in May. The handoff happened in the parking lot of the Family Services Center, Elena's car pulling in, Caleb's borrowed Civic already there, both of them getting out with the careful choreography of 2 people who have been practicing how to be civil in Proximus Ignity. Elena unbuckled Noah from the car seat and handed him across. Noah went to Caleb's arms without the immediate tensing. He still turned his head, still looked toward his mother with the instinctive orientation of a child toward his primary anchor, but he didn't cry. He held Caleb's coat lapel with one small fist, which had become his habit over the last few weeks, a grip that communicated not trust exactly, but at least the beginning of something that wasn't fear. Elena stood beside her open car door. Caleb looked at her. I'll be at the park on East Lake, he said, the one with the pond. She nodded. 4 hours, 4 hours. She looked at Noah. Not at Caleb, at Noah. The look of a mother releasing a child into a situation she cannot fully control, with every muscle in her body quietly at war, with the stillness she was holding on the outside. He had lunch already, she said. There are snacks in the bag. She hesitated. He's been interested in ducks lately. He makes a sound when he sees birds. She stopped, made a small involuntary sound that was nearly a laugh at herself. You'll hear it. Okay, Caleb said. She got in her car. He got in his. He drove to the park. He found a bench near the edge of the pond, in a patch of May sun that was warm enough to sit in without a coat. He took Noah out of the carrier and held him facing forward so he could see the water. A duck moved along the far edge of the pond. Noah made a sound. It was a short, high, arrested sound, the sound of a brain encountering something it finds extraordinary, and not yet having the architecture to do anything with the experience except emit it. Pure reaction, pure presence. Caleb felt it move through his chest like something breaking open. He held his son in the May sun and watched a duck move across a pond and understood, without anyone in the room to confirm it, that this was what he had been trying to get to. Not the hearing, not the order, not the 4 hours or the legal expansion or the judge's approval. This, his son's hand on his coat, the sound Noah made at a duck. The ordinary Saturday morning wait of a child who was provisionally beginning to know him. He stayed at the park for the full 4 hours. When he returned to the handoff location, Elena was already there, waiting beside her car. She watched him pull in. She watched him get out and unstrap Noah from the carrier with the practiced movements that had become, over 12 weeks, actual competence. He handed Noah to her. Noah went to her arms and immediately relaxed into the particular bonelessness of a baby returning to his primary safe place, and Elena held him and looked at Caleb over Noah's head. How was it, she said, the first time she'd asked him that. He heard a duck, Caleb said. Something shifted in her face. He makes a sound, she said. Yeah, Caleb said. You were right about that. They stood in the parking lot, 4 feet apart, with Noah between them in Elena's arms, and the May afternoon doing its ordinary beautiful business around them. Elena looked at him for a moment with the measuring quality that had been there since the courthouse, since Montana, since before all of this, the look of a woman who had learned to read him very carefully and was still, despite everything, reading. Then she nodded, one small, careful, non-committal nod. She put Noah in his car seat. She drove away. Caleb stood in the parking lot. His hands were in his pockets. The afternoon was warm. Down the street somewhere, a lawnmower was running the first of the season, the particular smell of cut grass that means winter is finished. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Not Silas he'd confirmed. Silas was done. Not Walsh she'd communicated through Reeves since Thursday. He opened it. The text read, You need to know something about Ridgeline. Call me. It's not what you think it is. TV Tessa Vale. He stared at the screen. The lawnmower sound drifted on the May air. The parking lot was empty. Noah was 3 minutes down the road in his mother's car, going home to the apartment that Caleb had never seen, carrying inside him the sound he made at ducks and the very beginning of knowing his father's face. Caleb looked at Tessa's text. He looked at it for a long time. Then he typed, Do not contact me again. He hit send. He put his phone in his pocket. He got in the Civic and drove toward the review hearing that was still 90 days away, toward the therapy session on Wednesday, toward the 4 hours next Saturday, and the 4 hours after that. He drove toward the only thing left that mattered, which was not a hearing and not a judge and not a legal outcome. It was a bench by a pond and a duck and a sound his son made. And 90 days from now, Judge Carver was going to ask him what he had done when nobody was watching. He already knew his answer. The 90 days passed the way difficult things pass when you stop counting them, not quickly, not easily, but steadily, the way a tide moves whether you watch it or not. Caleb showed up. That was the whole of it, reduced to its essential form. He showed up to the Saturday visits, and he showed up to Aldrich's office on Thursdays, and he showed up to the final session of the parenting course on a Tuesday evening in May in a community center classroom with 7 other people who were all navigating some version of the same gap between who they'd been and who they needed to become. He showed up to the Civic every morning and drove it without the truck's elevated sense of himself, which turned out to matter less than he'd expected. He showed up to the office and ran his business, and paid his 11 employees on time, and responded to Ridgelein's audit requests with complete documentation, and did not submit a single invoice that wasn't attached to an actual service actually rendered. He showed up. Week by week, Noah changed in the way that children change when you are actually present to observe it, not in retrospect, not in photographs, but in real time, the incremental daily accumulation of a human being becoming more specifically himself. At 5 months, he tracked faces. At 6 months, he sat with support and reached for things with both hands, and occasionally grabbed Caleb's collar and held on with a grip that was surprisingly strong for someone whose entire body weighed 17 pounds. At 7 months, he laughed a real laugh, not reflex, not gas, but genuine laughter at a thing he found funny, which in this case was Caleb making a particular face involving his eyebrows that Noah found inexplicably hilarious every single time. Caleb made that face more than he could count. He was not ashamed of this. He sat in Aldrich's office on a Thursday in June and said, unprompted, I made a face at my kid for 45 minutes on Saturday because it made him laugh, and Aldrich took his glasses off and said, how did that feel? And Caleb said, like the most useful thing I've done in years, and meant it completely. Tessa Vale sent 2 more texts in May. He didn't open either of them. He forwarded them to Reeves, who forwarded them to Walsh, who sent Tessa a formal communication advising her that contact with Caleb Mercer during an ongoing civil and administrative proceeding was inadvisable. The texts stopped. In June, Reeves called with the final resolution of the Ridgeline matter. The state had accepted the civil settlement full restitution, plus a fine equal to 20% of the fraudulent amount. No criminal prosecution. A permanent notation in the business licensing records that would be visible to anyone who looked, which Refaz told him to expect and to accept, because it was the accurate record of what had happened, and disputing it was not a fight worth having. He accepted it. He signed the documents on a Tuesday afternoon in Reeves's office, with the Pike Place market visible through the window, the ordinary commerce of the city going about its business, the flower stalls and the fish market and the tourists taking photographs, and he signed without the nausea he'd expected to feel. He felt something closer to relief, which surprised him until he thought about it and understood the anxiety of concealment was gone. Whatever the notation said about him was true. The truth, it turned out, was lighter than the lie had been. He thanked Reeves. He paid her invoice without wincing. He walked out into the June afternoon and bought a coffee from the stand near the market entrance and stood for a while watching the city. He thought about Elena at 3 a.m., writing in a journal. He thought about the first text she'd sent him in November, the one he'd put face down. He thought about Holloway sitting at his kitchen table, not drinking the coffee, saying she took her son in the specific, careful way that had been the first true thing anyone had said to him in that period. He thought about Noah's laugh. He threw away the coffee cup and went back to work. The second 90-day review was on a Wednesday in late July. By then, Seattle had moved into the particular brief perfection of its summer, the sky gone genuinely blue, the water catching it, the city transformed by a season that the other 9 months make you forget is coming. Caleb had taken Noah to the park every Saturday and twice to the aquarium, where Noah had pressed his palm flat against the glass of the jellyfish tank and stared at them with the concentrated wonder of someone encountering something the world hadn't prepared him for. Caleb had a photograph of that moment on his phone. Noah's hand on the glass, the jellyfish pulsing behind it. He looked at it sometimes, not constantly. Not in the way of a man trying to document his own improvement, but the way you look at something that has become genuinely important to you. He walked into the courthouse on the Wednesday in July, feeling something he couldn't immediately name. Not confidence, not certainty, something quieter than either. The specific steadiness of a man who has stopped waiting for the ground to shift under him because he has spent 90 days learning to stand on it. Brant was in the lobby. "Ready," Brant said. "Yes," Caleb said. And meant it differently than he'd meant it in April, not as a performance of readiness, but as an accurate report on his internal condition. They went in. The courtroom. The fluorescent lights. Judge Carver with her papers already organized, her reading glasses already in place. The expression of a woman who had processed this case thoroughly and was here to deliver a determination rather than to be persuaded. Elena was at the opposite table. She was wearing a blue shirt Caleb didn't recognize, which meant she'd bought it after she left, which meant it belonged entirely to the life she'd built without him. He noticed this and filed it without the sharp quality it would have had in February. It was just true she had a life. It didn't include him. That was the arrangement, and it was, on balance, the right arrangement. She glanced at him when he sat down. He nodded. She looked back at the front of the room. Forsyth presented first. Her presentation was shorter than previous hearings. She acknowledged the visit documentation, the therapy completion, the Ridgeline resolution. She noted carefully that the civil settlement remained a relevant character consideration. She asked the court to approach any expansion of custody with continued caution. She was doing her job. It was, Caleb had come to understand, a job worth doing. She was protecting Elena and Noah, which was the correct thing to protect. Brant presented the full 90 days. Visit reports 16 visits, all attended, none missed, none shortened. Therapy documentation 12 weekly sessions. Aldrich written summary confirming genuine and sustained engagement. The parenting course certificate. Patterson's final visit report, which noted in Patterson's particular clinical language that the father-child relationship had progressed from initial dysregulation to consistent positive engagement with demonstrable improvement in the child's response to paternal presence. Then Judge Carver looked at Caleb. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I asked you at the last hearing what you would do when no one was watching. I'd like to know your answer." Caleb looked at her. "I took him to the aquarium," he said. He put his hand on the jellyfish tank. He didn't have any language for what he was seeing, but he needed to touch the glass anyway, like that would help him understand it better. He paused. "I've been thinking about that. About how kids learn things through contact, through presence, through just being in the same space as something long enough that it becomes familiar. He's been learning me the same way, just through showing up." He met the judge's eyes. "That's what I did when nobody was watching. The same thing I was doing when they were." Carver looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her papers. "The court finds that Mr. Mercer has demonstrated the sustained behavioral change it was looking for at the previous review. Visitation is expanded to joint custody, alternating weeks, effective in 30 days to allow for transition planning. Primary residence remains with Mrs. Mercer during the transition period. The monitoring order is lifted. Direct communication between the parties regarding Noah's welfare and scheduling is permitted and encouraged." She paused. The court also wishes to note for the record that what has been demonstrated here is not an easy thing. The circumstances of this case, the documented failures, the legal proceedings, the financial matter, these are not a small set of obstacles to have navigated. The court is not in the business of congratulating people for doing what they should have done from the beginning. But the court is in the business of recognizing when something real has happened. She looked at Caleb, and then at Elena, with the even attention of someone who had spent decades in these rooms. "Both of you have worked very hard for this child. That is what the court sees." She closed her folder. "We're adjourned." Outside the courthouse in the July afternoon, Elena stood on the steps with her bag on her shoulder, and Forsyth beside her, speaking quietly. Caleb came out a minute after her. Brant was with him, saying something about the transition logistics, the 30-day period, the communication protocols. Caleb said, "Give me a minute." Brant looked at him. Looked at Elena on the steps. Looked back at Caleb. "1 minute," Brant said. He walked away. Forsyth saw Caleb approach and said something to Elena, who nodded, and Forsyth moved a few steps off, not far, within eyeline but out of earshot. Caleb stopped in front of Elena. The July sky over Seattle was the particular blue that the city produced for exactly these weeks each summer, sharp and genuine and almost unfairly beautiful, given what it was being used to witness. "I'm not going to make a speech," he said. "Good," Elena said. "I just wanted to say—"
He stopped.
Reorganized. The journal entries. "I know you didn't write them for me to read. I know they weren't meant as a message to me. But I read them, and I've been carrying them around since March, and I needed you to know that I read them." Elena looked at him. Her face was careful in the way it had been since the beginning of all this, not closed, not open, just carefully held. "The one about the smile," he said. "When Noah smiled for the first time, and I said—" "I remember," Elena said. "I know." He looked at the courthouse steps beneath his feet. "I know you remember. I'm saying I know now, too." He looked up at her. "I know what I missed. All of it. And I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to say it directly. Not in a courtroom, not through attorneys." He paused. "I'm sorry, Elena. Not for the legal record. Just I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. The city moved around them. Cars, people. The ordinary motion of a July afternoon. "I know you are," she said. "Not I forgive you. Not it's okay." Just the plain acknowledgement that she believed him, which was its own significant thing, the first honest thing she'd given him directly since she'd left. The 30-day transition, she said, shifting into the practical with the ease of someone who had learned to live in practical matters, because the emotional ones had been too costly for too long. Forsyth and Brant can work out the logistics. "I'd like to do the first exchange at the park. The one with the pond. The ducks," Caleb said. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The closest thing to one she'd offered him in 7 months. "He still makes that sound." "I know," Caleb said. "I've been taking him there every week." Elena looked at him, the measuring look, the one he'd come to understand was not suspicion but accuracy. Elena had always been accurate. He'd just spent 4 years resenting her for it. "Okay," she said. She went down the steps. Caleb watched her go. Brant reappeared beside him. "Well?" he said. "Joint custody," Caleb said. "Alternating weeks." "That's a good outcome," Brant said. "That's actually a very good outcome." "I know." Caleb looked at the street. "It doesn't feel like winning." "No," Brant said. "It shouldn't." He paused. "It should feel like starting." Marcus came over that evening with beer he didn't drink and food he didn't order specifically, and the general quality of a person who is showing up, because showing up is the thing. They sat on the back porch Caleb's house, which he had not sold, which he was thinking. Now he might actually keep in the July evening with the lights of the neighborhood coming on around them, and the particular silence of two men who have been friends long enough that silence is comfortable. "Joint custody," Marcus said. "Alternating weeks." Marcus took a breath. "Caleb, that's real." "Yeah. How do you feel?" Caleb thought about it in the way he'd been thinking about things lately, not managing toward an acceptable answer, but actually sitting with the question. Like someone who just passed a test they probably shouldn't have been allowed to take, he said. Marcus looked at him. That's a weird way to put it. I mean, he set his beer down. The judge said the right things. She talked about sustained change, demonstrated improvement. And those things are true. But I also know that 7 months ago I was submitting fraudulent invoices and flying to Montana in violation of a court order and not coming home when my wife told me she was scared. He looked at the yard. The person who did those things is still in here. I haven't expelled him. I've just been keeping him still. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's everyone, man, he said. That's not a Caleb Mercer thing. That's everybody who's ever tried to change anything about themselves. The old version doesn't go away. You just get better at not letting it run the whole operation. Caleb looked at the yard. There was a patch of bare dirt near the back fence where he'd been meaning to do something grass, a garden, something. It had been bare since they bought the house, one of those things always deferred for later. He'd been thinking lately about a swing set. The kind you build yourself from a kit, the instructions in 3 languages, the parts spread across a Saturday afternoon. Noah was 7 months old. He couldn't use a swing yet. But he'd be a year old before the summer was out, and then a year and a half, and the accumulation of ordinary time moved faster than it seemed like it should. I'm going to build a swing set, Caleb said. Marcus looked at the yard. Then at Caleb. No, this weekend. I found one you order the kit. It takes a day to put together if you know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. I'll figure it out. Marcus looked at the bare patch of dirt. I'll come help, he said. The swing set took a day and a half. The instructions were in 4 languages, not 3, and several of the diagrams were wrong in ways that only became apparent after Caleb had already bolted things together in the incorrect sequence and had to undo them. Marcus held pieces and read instructions, and at one point sat on the ground laughing at something that was genuinely funny, in the way physical comedy is funny when you are not the one who dropped the thing. By Sunday evening it was standing. Caleb walked around it once. It was solid, it was level. It had a regular swing and a bucket swing for younger children, and a small slide that Noah would not be able to use for at least 6 months. He stood in front of it in the July evening light. He took a photograph and sent it to Elena. She replied after a few minutes, "He'll like that." 3 words. But she'd replied that was new. He looked at the swing set for a while longer. Then he went inside and made dinner, actual dinner, not takeout, not reheated anything. He had been teaching himself to cook in the incremental, frustrated, occasionally successful way of someone with no instinct for it, who has decided it matters anyway. He made something that was edible, and probably wasn't what the recipe intended, but was unambiguously food that he had made. He ate it at the kitchen table, the table where the wedding ring had sat that February morning, cold and small. The period at the end of a sentence Elena had been writing for months. The ring was in a drawer somewhere. He hadn't moved it. It was hers to do something with when she was ready, and it wasn't his to decide what that meant. He ate dinner. He called his mother, something he'd been doing more frequently since February, having realized somewhere in the process of examining his own failures that his mother had called him every 2 weeks for 6 years, and he had returned approximately every 3rd call. She answered on the 2nd ring, delighted in the way she always was when he called, which was a grace he hadn't earned and was only beginning to appreciate. He talked to her for 40 minutes about nothing of consequence: her garden, a neighbor's new dog, a movie she'd seen twice, the ordinary domestic texture of a life being lived. When he hung up, he sat for a while in the quiet kitchen. He thought about the journal entries one more time, not with the grinding guilt of the early months, but with the cleaner weight of something he'd integrated. Elena at 3 a.m., writing to their son, "Your dad is a complicated man." He thought about how accurate that was, and how it would probably remain accurate for the rest of his life, and how the question was not whether he was complicated, but whether the complications were ones. Noah could eventually understand and live alongside. He thought he could make that possible. He wasn't sure yet. But he thought so. The first alternating week exchange happened on a Saturday in August. The park, the pond, the ducks. Elena arrived in her car at 11, Noah in the back seat. The familiar choreography of unbuckling and transferring, and the diaper bag with its emergency contents and the feeding schedule that had evolved over 7 months into something Noah increasingly negotiated on his own terms. She lifted Noah out of the seat. Noah looked at Caleb over her shoulder. With the 7-month-old specific alertness, he knew the face now, knew it the way he knew the park and the pond and the particular quality of Saturday morning. He reached out with one hand in the direction of Caleb's jacket lapel. Caleb took him. Noah grabbed the lapel, held on. Elena stood beside the open car door. She was watching Noah, the way she always did at exchanges, the monitoring attention of a mother tracking her child's emotional state the way a weather instrument tracks pressure. Noah was fine. Noah was. Caleb could feel genuinely fine settled against him, one fist full of jacket fabric, his head turning toward the pond with the efficient interest of a child who's been to this place before and knows what it has to offer. "A week," Elena said. "A week," Caleb confirmed. She looked at Noah one more time. Then at Caleb, the measuring look, honest and direct. "Call me if anything, I will," he said. "I'll call you." She nodded. She got in the car. She didn't drive away immediately. She sat for a moment, and Caleb understood what that moment was, the gathering of a woman who was doing something that cost her something, and was doing it anyway, because it was right for her child. Then she drove away. Caleb stood at the edge of the pond with Noah in his arms. A duck moved along the near bank. Then 2 more, coming around the reed line in single file with the confident authority of animals who know the geography of a place. Noah made the sound. The high, arrested, pure signal sound of a child encountering something the world keeps surprising him with, even though he has seen it before. Because ducks, apparently, were still funny. Still extraordinary. Still worth the sound every single time. Caleb felt it in his chest the way he always did. He adjusted Noah's weight, settled him higher against his shoulder so the boy could see the water better, and said, "Yeah, I know." They keep showing up. Noah reached toward the ducks with one arm, fingers spread, the reaching gesture of a child who has not yet learned that some things can't be grabbed and maybe shouldn't be taught that lesson too quickly. That one in front, Caleb said, "He's the boss. See how he goes first? That's what that looks like." Noah made another sound, shorter, more considered. "I know," Caleb said. "I had opinions about that too." 3 months after the joint custody order, on a Saturday in November, Caleb finished the backyard. He'd seeded the bare patch behind the swing set in September, when the Seattle fall was still soft enough to take root. He'd watered it through October with the particular faithfulness of someone tending something that doesn't show its results for a long time. By November, it was coming in not lush, not perfect, thin in the far corner where the shade fell wrong, but green. Genuinely, stubbornly green. He stood and looked at it on that Saturday morning before Elena's car arrived for the exchange. The swing set was there. The grass was coming in. The yard looked like a place where a child could run, which was the thing he'd been building toward, without being able to name it. Elena's car pulled up at 10 a.m. Noah had been walking for 6 weeks unsteadily, with the commitment and the spectacular failure rate of a being who has recently discovered a method of locomotion and cannot talk out of enthusiasm for it. He walked from the car to the backyard gate with Elena's hand as an emergency resource and Caleb's voice carrying from the yard, and he went through the gate with his particular determined lurch and stopped when he saw the swing set. He looked at it. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the swing set again. He said clearly, unmistakably, in the specific register of a 13-month-old making his desires known to the world, "Up." Caleb laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out of him like something that had been waiting. He crossed the yard and lifted Noah and put him in the bucket swing and pushed him gently, the way you push a child who is still figuring out what the motion means. Noah's face went through surprise, then adjustment, then the beginning of delight, the processing sequence of someone encountering something new. "Higher," Noah said. Or something close enough to it that Caleb understood it as higher. "Not yet," Caleb said. "You just got in." He pushed him gently. Back and forth. The November morning around them quiet and gray, in the way that Seattle November mornings are, the light soft, the yard still, the grass thin in the corner where the shade fell wrong. He looked up. Elena was standing at the gate. She hadn't left. She was standing there watching, her hands in her coat pockets, her expression with something in it. That was not the measuring look, not the careful control, not the finished grief of Montana or the exhausted accuracy of the courtroom. Something different, something that was simply watching her son in a swing in a yard with his father. Caleb looked at her for a moment. She didn't say anything. He pushed the swing. Noah laughed the full laugh, the one Caleb had first heard in June and had been hearing every Saturday since, the laugh that had nothing complicated in it. That was just the sound of a child's body understanding joy before the brain has the language for it. Elena stayed at the gate. After a while, she came through it and sat on the bench. Caleb had put near the fence, her coat pulled around her face in the direction of Noah in the swing. Not toward Caleb, not a conversation, just a mother sitting in proximity to her child on a Saturday morning because proximity was possible now and she had chosen to use it. They stayed like that for a while. The swing moved. Noah made scent sounds. The gray November light came down even and unchanged across the yard that Caleb had built for a version of his life he'd had to lose everything to find. At some point, Elena said, without looking at him, "He calls you Dada now." In the apartment. When he wakes up from his nap, sometimes he says it. Caleb stopped pushing for a moment. He started again. "I didn't know that," he said. "I know." A pause. "I thought you should." He kept pushing the swing. Noah laughed. The gray light came down. After Elena left, Noah gathered up and buckled in, the week's logistics confirmed in the practical shorthand they'd built, the exchange done with the civil ease of two people who had practiced something difficult enough times that it had become, if not natural, at least navigable. Caleb stood in the yard alone. The swing moved slightly, in a breath of November wind, the small motion of something that had been used and now waited. He looked at the grass coming in, at the corner where it was thin. He'd fix that corner in the spring, different seed maybe, or less shade. Something. He looked at the swing. He looked at the yard that had been a bare patch of dirt 7 months ago, and was now a place where his son had laughed on a Saturday morning in November, while both his parents were present, in their separate ways, in their separate distances, which was not the family anyone had planned, but was the one that existed and could, with sustained and unglamorous effort, be one his son lived inside without damage. That was the goal. Not winning, not the house or the money or the version of himself he'd spent 34 years constructing and 6 months dismantling. Just the goal of being a man his son could trust. He wasn't sure he was there yet. He thought he was close. He thought close, sustained, and not abandoned, eventually became the thing itself. He went inside. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table with the November light coming through the window, and he opened his phone, and he looked at the photograph of Noah's hand on the aquarium glass with the jellyfish pulsing behind it, and he thought about the 38 Saturdays he had ahead of him before next November. He put his phone down. He drank his coffee. He was still there.